They dragged her through the mud like a wild animal, bound and bloodied, but Ayla Redhawk's eyes burned with a fire that made grown men look away. The Montana frontier market fell silent as the trader's whip cracked. Once, twice, and still she wouldn't kneel. "This one's got too much fight," someone muttered. "Break her or bury her." But from the shadows, a scarred rancher named Ethan Cole stepped forward, his voice quiet as thunder. "I'll take her. Not to tame her, not to own her, but to set her free. What happens next will shake them both to the core. Stay with me until the end, hit that like button, and comment your city below so I can see how far this story travels." The wooden platform creaked under Ayla's weight as rough hands shoved her forward. Dust swirled around the makeshift auction block, catching the late afternoon sun in amber streaks that did nothing to soften the brutality of the scene. Around her, the frontier market sprawled in chaotic disarray, canvas tents flapping in the wind, livestock penned beside barrels of whiskey, trappers haggling over pelts while women in faded calico pretended not to notice the human being displayed like cattle. Ayla's wrist burned where the rope cut into her skin. Her left eye had swollen nearly shut from the blow she'd taken that morning when she'd refused to walk fast enough. Blood had dried in a thin line down her temple, matting strands of her long black hair to her cheek. Her deerskin dress, once beautifully adorned with beadwork her grandmother had taught her to make, hung torn and muddied. But despite the bruises painting her bronze skin in shades of purple and yellow, despite the hunger gnawing at her belly and the exhaustion weighing down her limbs, Ayla Redhawk stood straight. She would not bow. "Now this here's a prime specimen," the trader announced, his voice carrying across the crowd with practiced showmanship. Vernon Briggs was a thick-necked man with a beard stained yellow from tobacco, his leather vest straining over a belly that spoke of good profits and better meals. He grabbed Ayla's chin, forcing her face toward the gathering crowd. "Strong as an ox, this one. Bit wild yet, but that just means she ain't been ruined by soft living." Ayla jerked her head away, earning a sharp backhand that snapped her face to the side. The crowd murmured, some in disapproval of the treatment, most in assessment of whether such spirit could be broken. "See that fire?" Briggs laughed, wiping his hand on his pants. "That's what you want in a worker. Means she's got endurance. Train her right, and she'll outwork any 3 lazy white girls you could hire." He circled her slowly, his boots heavy on the platform. "Can cook, clean, work a field, birth babies, everything a frontier man needs to build a homestead. And gentlemen, let's be honest, she's easy on the eyes if you're man enough to handle her." Ayla's jaw clenched. She scanned the faces in the crowd, weathered men in worn hats, a few women with hard eyes and harder lives, even some children watching with curiosity they were too young to understand was cruel. No one met her gaze for long. Shame, she realized, looked a lot like indifference when people wanted to justify what they were watching. "We'll start the bidding at $50, Briggs announced. "50? A lean man in a beaver-skin coat scoffed. "For a savage? You're out of your mind, Vernon. I can get a Mexican girl for 30, and she'll already speak some English." "This ain't no ordinary squaw," Briggs shot back. "Ayla here's Crow Nation. That means she knows these mountains like her own hand. She can track, trap, tell you which berries will feed you and which will kill you. You take her west, she's worth her weight in gold just for that knowledge alone." "If she's so valuable, why are you selling her?" a woman called out, her voice sharp with skepticism. Briggs's smile faltered for just a moment. "Let's just say she didn't take kindly to her previous arrangements. Man who had her before met with an unfortunate accident. Fell off his horse, broke his neck." He paused meaningfully. "Horse was tied up at the time." The crowd shifted uneasily. Ayla allowed herself the smallest smile. They were afraid. Good. Fear was the only currency she had left. "So what you're saying," the beavercoat man drawled, "is she's a murderer." "I'm saying she's got survival instinct," Briggs countered. "And I'm saying the man who can master that instinct gets himself a woman who'll never let him starve, never let him get lost, and never—" He grabbed Ayla's arm roughly. "Never give up when times get hard." $40, someone offered. 45, another voice joined. Ayla closed her eyes briefly. The numbers rising around her felt like water closing over her head. Each bid was another link in a chain she couldn't break. She'd been free once, really free, She remembered running through meadows of wildflowers with her cousins, the sun warm on her face and her grandmother's laughter echoing across the valley. She remembered her mother teaching her to bead by firelight, her father showing her how to read the stars. She remembered a life where she belonged to herself, where her name meant something more than property. That was before the soldiers came, before the treaties no one honored, before her family was scattered like seeds on the wind, and she'd been passed from one white man's hands to another's like a rifle or a saddle. 55. The bidding had slowed. $55. Apparently that was what her life was worth today. Ayla opened her eyes and studied the man who'd spoken. He was older, with a face like weathered leather and hands that looked too eager. She'd seen that look before. It never ended well. 55 going once, Briggs called out, his hand raised. Going twice. 75. The new voice cut through the crowd like a blade. Quiet, but absolute. Heads turned toward the back of the gathering, and Ayla strained to see who had spoken. He stood apart from the others, a tall figure in a dusty coat that had seen better years. His hat was pulled low, shadowing his face, but Ayla could make out a strong jaw, dark with several days' stubble, and a scar that ran from his left temple down to his cheekbone. He didn't push forward into the crowd. He simply stood there, still as stone, waiting. Briggs's eyes lit up with greed. Well, now we've got ourselves a serious buyer. $75 from the gentleman in back. Anyone want to go 80? Silence stretched across the market. The weathered man who'd bid 55 shook his head and spat into the dust. 75 for a crow girl with murder in her blood? Man's a fool. Sold. Briggs slammed his hand down on the platform railing. To the gentleman for $75. Come on up and claim your property, sir. The stranger moved through the crowd with an odd, careful gait, favoring his right leg slightly. As he climbed the platform steps, Ayla got her first clear look at him. He was younger than she'd initially thought, maybe 30 or 35, with eyes the color of creek water in winter, pale blue-green and just as cold. Or perhaps not cold, perhaps guarded. The scar on his face was old, silver-white against sun-weathered skin, and his hands, when he reached into his coat for a leather pouch, bore the calluses of hard labor. He counted out the money without speaking, placing each coin deliberately on the platform railing. Briggs scooped them up with indecent haste, biting one to test its authenticity before nodding with satisfaction. Pleasure doing business, Mr. Cole, the stranger said. His voice was rough, like it wasn't used often. Ethan Cole. Well, Mr. Cole, she's all yours. Briggs grabbed the rope binding Ayla's wrists and thrust it toward Ethan like a leash. Word of advice. Keep her tied up first few weeks. They always run it first. And don't turn your back on her until she's learned her place. Ethan took the rope slowly, his eyes moving from it to Briggs's face with an expression Ayla couldn't quite read. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he turned to her. Can you walk? The question startled her, not an order, not an assumption, a question. Ayla nodded once, her throat too tight for words. Then let's go. He didn't pull the rope. He simply turned and walked down the platform steps, the rope loose in his hand. After a heartbeat of hesitation, Ayla followed. The crowd parted around them, some faces curious, others disapproving, a few openly hostile. She heard the whispers, "Fool," asking for trouble. Give her a week and she'll slit his throat. Ethan led her through the market toward a dusty wagon hitched to two sturdy horses. The animals were well kept, their coats brushed, their eyes calm. Ayla knew horses. Her people had been among the finest riders in the territories, and these were good stock, treated with care. Ethan stopped at the wagon bed and finally looked at her directly. In the fading light, his eyes weren't cold at all. They were careful, assessing, but not cruel. I'm going to untie you, he said quietly. But first I need to know, are you hurt? Besides the obvious. He gestured toward her swollen eye and the cuts on her wrists. Ayla stared at him. Was this a trick? Some kind of test? I don't bite, he added, a ghost of dry humor in his voice. And I don't expect you to trust me, but I need to know if you require a doctor before we start the ride to the ranch. No doctor, Ayla managed, her voice hoarse from disuse. She hadn't spoken in days. I'm fine. You're not fine. Ethan corrected, but not unkindly. But I understand. He reached for the rope at her wrists, and instinctively she flinched back. He froze, hands raised slightly. I'm just going to remove these. You have my word. Slowly, watching him for any sign of deception, Ayla extended her hands. Ethan pulled a knife from his belt. She tensed, ready to fight, but he simply cut through the rope with quick, efficient movements. The bonds fell away, and blood rushed painfully back into her hands. There's a canteen in the wagon, Ethan said, sheathing the knife. And some bread if you're hungry. We've got about 2 hours to the ranch. You can ride in the back or up front with me. Your choice. Your choice. Those words again. Ayla rubbed her raw wrists, trying to understand what game he was playing. Men didn't give women choices, especially not women they'd just purchased like livestock. Why? She asked, the word escaping before she could stop it. Why what? Why buy me? What do you want? Ethan was quiet for a moment, his gaze drifting toward the mountains rising purple in the distance. I need help on my ranch, he said finally. And you need a place that's not here. Seemed like a fair trade. Nothing's fair about this, Ayla shot back, anger suddenly flooding through her fear. You bought me. You own me. Don't pretend it's anything else. I bought your freedom from that man, Ethan said, his voice still level. What you do with it is up to you. If I walk away right now, then you walk away. Ayla searched his face for the lie, for the trap. She found nothing but a bone-deep weariness that matched her own. This man was tired in a way that had nothing to do with physical labor and everything to do with carrying weight that couldn't be seen. I'll sit up front, she heard herself say. Easier to jump off a moving wagon than climb out of the back. The corner of Ethan's mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. Fair enough. He helped her up onto the wagon bench, his hand steady but brief, releasing her the moment she was seated, then climbed up beside her. He gathered the reins, clicked his tongue, and the horses moved forward with practiced ease. They left the market behind, the noise and chaos fading into the vast Montana silence. The sky was beginning its transformation from blue to gold, clouds catching fire along the horizon. Ayla had forgotten how beautiful sunsets were when you weren't chained to watch them from inside a locked room. What's the ranch like? She asked after a while, surprising herself with the question. Remote, Ethan answered. About 600 acres tucked up against the mountains. River runs through the west side. Got maybe 40 head of cattle, some chickens, a few pigs. House is small but solid. It's quiet. You live alone? I do now. Something in his tone made it clear that topic was closed. They rode in silence for a while, the wagon wheels crunching over the dirt road. Ayla watched the landscape change from scrubby grassland to rolling hills, finally giving way to forested slopes. The air grew cooler, scented with pine and the promise of snow that would come soon. She breathed it in deeply, tasting freedom, or something close to it, for the first time in months. There's a creek about a mile ahead, Ethan said as the light began to fail. We'll stop there, let the horses drink. You can wash up if you want. I've got some salve for those cuts. Ayla nodded, too tired to argue or question. When they reached the creek, a clear, cold stream tumbling over smooth stones, Ethan stopped the wagon and climbed down. He didn't tell her what to do. He simply tended to the horses, giving her space. She approached the water slowly, kneeling at its edge. Her reflection stared back at her, a stranger's face, bruised and hollow-eyed. She looked like a ghost of the girl she'd been. Carefully, she cupped the icy water in her hands and brought it to her face, hissing at the sting against her split lip. The cold was shocking, painful, perfect. It made her feel real again. Behind her, she heard Ethan moving around the wagon, heard the soft whicker of horses. He wasn't watching her, wasn't hovering. The realization was strange, almost disorienting. She was so used to eyes on her, always monitoring, always assessing, always waiting for a reason to punish. She washed the blood from her face and hands, carefully cleaned the rope burns on her wrists. The water turned pink, then clear again, carrying away the evidence of what she'd survived. When she finally stood, Ethan was sitting on a fallen log, a small tin in his hand. This will help, he said, holding out the salve. It's made from comfrey and yarrow. He paused. Someone I knew used to make it. Works on cuts and bruises both. Ayla took the tin, opened it, and sniffed. The herbs were familiar, properly prepared. Whoever had made this knew what they were doing. She dabbed some on her wrists, wincing at the initial sting before the cooling relief set in. "Thank you," she said quietly. Ethan nodded. "We should keep moving. Want to reach the ranch before full dark." They climbed back onto the wagon, and the journey continued. Night fell completely, stars emerging in impossible numbers across the black sky. Isla had forgotten how many stars there were when you got away from towns and their fires. She found the North Star, then traced the path her grandmother had taught her. The hunter, the great bear, the 7 sisters keeping watch over the world. "You know the stars," Ethan observed. It wasn't a question. "My grandmother taught me. She said as long as you could read the sky, you'd never be lost." Smart woman. She was. Ayla's throat tightened. "She's gone now. They all are." Ethan didn't offer empty sympathies. He just nodded, his eyes on the dark road ahead. After a moment, he spoke again. "My wife died 3 years ago," he said, the words careful and slow like he was handling something fragile. "Fever took her. She was everything good about this place. When she left, she took the light with her." Ayla glanced at him. In the moonlight, his scarred face looked carved from stone, but his eyes were somewhere else, seeing someone she'd never meet. "I'm sorry," she said, and meant it. "Me too." He was quiet for a long moment. "I don't tell you this for sympathy. I tell you so you understand. I'm not looking to replace her. I'm not looking for anything like that. I just need help keeping the place running, and maybe," he paused, choosing words, "maybe company that isn't just my own dark thoughts." "And if I leave?" Ayla asked again, needing to hear it one more time. "Then you leave." Ethan met her eyes. "I meant what I said. You're not a prisoner. Stay as long as it suits you. Leave when it doesn't. All I ask is honest work for honest pay while you're there." "Pay?" "Room, board, and $1 a week in coin. More if the cattle sell well come spring. It's not much, but it's fair." Ayla's mind spun. Pay. Real wages, not just scraps and the privilege of staying alive. The possibility felt dangerous, too good to be real. "Why would you do this?" she asked. "You could have bought a girl from town, someone who'd be grateful, someone who wouldn't," she gestured at herself, "be what I am." "And what are you?" "Dangerous, wild, everything that man at the market said." Ethan actually smiled then, a real one that transformed his face from severe to something almost warm. "I spent 6 months in a Union field hospital during the war," he said. "Had a minié ball shatter my femur and another crack 3 ribs. The doctor said I'd never walk right again, probably never work. But I was too stubborn to listen. I dragged myself out of that bed, learned to walk on a leg held together with wire and prayers, and built a ranch that shouldn't exist this far into the mountains." He pulled the wagon to a stop and turned to face her fully. "So when I see someone who refuses to break when the whole world's trying to snap them in half, I recognize it. And I respect it. I don't want grateful. I want someone who fights. Because out here, that's what it takes to survive." Ayla stared at him, searching for the deception, for the angle. But there was none. Just a tired man with sad eyes who saw something in her that wasn't broken property. "I'll stay," she said slowly, "for now. But the first time you raise a hand to me, the first time you try to make me something I'm not." "You'll leave," Ethan finished, "and I won't stop you." He extended his hand, not to grab, but to shake. "Deal?" After a long hesitation, Ayla reached out and gripped his hand. His palm was rough with calluses, his grip firm but brief. "Deal." They rode the final miles in comfortable silence. When they crested a rise and Ayla saw the ranch for the first time, her breath caught. It was small, a log cabin with a stone chimney, a barn, some outbuildings, but it sat in a valley of such wild beauty it made her chest ache. The moon painted everything silver. The meadow grass, the pine trees marching up the mountainside, the river cutting a dark ribbon through the land. "It's not much," Ethan said, misreading her silence for disappointment. "It's perfect," Ayla whispered. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, she meant something without calculation or fear behind it. Ethan drove the wagon to the barn, where a lantern already burned, left lit for their arrival. He helped her down, again, that brief, respectful touch, and led her toward the house. "There's a room off the kitchen," he explained as they crossed the porch. "Used to be a pantry, but I converted it when—" He stopped. "When I thought I might need help around here. It's small, but it's private. Has a real bed, a window, a door that locks from the inside." From the inside. Ayla's eyes stung unexpectedly at that detail. The house was clean but sparse, everything functional and well-maintained. Ethan lit a lamp as the kitchen, illuminating a room with a sturdy table, a cast-iron stove, and shelves lined with preserves. He opened a door to reveal the small room he'd mentioned, barely bigger than a closet, but it had a narrow bed with clean blankets, a washstand, and a window looking out toward the mountains. "I'll bring in your things," Ethan said, then paused. "Do you have things?" "No." Everything she'd ever owned had been taken or lost long ago. He nodded, unsurprised. "I'll find you some clothes tomorrow. My wife was taller than you, but we can make them work. For tonight there's a nightshirt in the drawer there. Pump for water is just outside the kitchen door. Privy's behind the house. I'll be upstairs if you need anything, but—" He met her eyes. "You won't be disturbed. I keep my word." "I believe you," Ayla said, and realized she did. Ethan looked startled, like no one had said that to him in a long time. He nodded once, then turned to leave. At the doorway, he paused. "Ayla?" "Yes?" "Welcome home." The words broke something inside her, some last desperate wall she'd been holding up to protect herself. Welcome home. As if she belonged here. As if this broken, wild thing she'd become was worthy of a home. "Thank you," she managed, her voice rough. When he was gone, Ayla closed the door and leaned against it, her legs suddenly weak. She was in a stranger's house, miles from anywhere, completely alone with a man she didn't know. Every instinct screamed danger, but as she looked around the small room, at the clean bed, the unlocked window, the door that secured from her side, she felt something she hadn't felt in so long she'd almost forgotten its name. Safe. She washed her face at the basin, found the nightshirt Ethan had mentioned, and changed out of her filthy dress. The nightshirt was soft, worn cotton that smelled like lavender and soap. She climbed into the bed and the mattress was actual straw and cloth, not dirt or a wooden floor. Through the window, she could see the mountains standing guard, and above them, her grandmother's stars keeping watch. Ayla closed her eyes, expecting the nightmares that always came. The soldiers, the chains, the hands that took what they wanted. But instead she saw Ethan's scarred face, his careful eyes, his extended hand. "You're not a prisoner." For the first time in 3 years, Ayla Redhawk slept without fear. And when the sun rose over the Montana mountains the next morning, painting the valley in shades of gold and amber, she woke not to chains or curses, but to the smell of coffee and the soft sound of someone cooking breakfast in the next room. A man who'd paid for her freedom and asked nothing in return. A man who'd given her the one thing no one else ever had, a choice. And as she dressed and prepared to face this strange new day, Ayla made a decision of her own. She would stay long enough to understand what this was. This odd arrangement that felt less like slavery and more like possibility. Outside, she heard Ethan's uneven footsteps cross the porch, heard him talking quietly to the horses in the barn. The ranch was waking up, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, so was something inside Ayla. Something that felt dangerously close to hope. The morning sun barely cleared the mountain peaks when Ayla stepped out of the small room, her body stiff from weeks of sleeping on hard ground, and her mind sharp with the wariness of someone who'd learned never to let their guard down completely. The kitchen was empty, but a pot of coffee sat on the stove, still warm, and beside it, a plate covered with a clean cloth. She lifted the corner to find bacon, eggs, and thick slices of bread already buttered. No note, no demands, just food, left as casually as if feeding her were the most natural thing in the world. Through the window, she could see Ethan in the corral, working with one of the horses. His movements were careful, favoring that injured leg, but his hands were steady and sure as he ran them along the animal's flank, checking for injuries or sores. The horse, a gray mare with intelligent eyes, leaned into his touch with the kind of trust that couldn't be forced. Ayla poured herself coffee, real coffee, not the chicory water she'd been given in recent months, and stood at the window, watching. Ethan wasn't breaking the horse. He was listening to it. She could see it in the way he paused when the mare shifted, the way he spoke too quietly for Ayla to hear, but with enough intention that the animal's ears swiveled toward him. Her people had understood horses this way, as partners rather than property. It was strange to see a white man handle them with the same respect. She ate standing up, too accustomed to grabbing meals quickly before they could be taken away. The food was simple but well prepared, the eggs cooked just until the yolks were still soft, the bacon crisp at the edges. When she'd finished, she washed her plate in the basin, dried it, and set it back on the shelf exactly where she'd found it. Then, after a moment's hesitation, she opened the back door and stepped outside. The morning air was sharp and clean, carrying the scent of pine and distant snow. The valley stretched before her, painted in shades of gold and green, the river glinting like hammered silver where it caught the light. For a moment, Ayla just stood there, breathing it in, feeling something in her chest loosen slightly. "Sleep all right?" She turned to find Ethan approaching from the corral, a coil of rope over his shoulder. His tone was casual, but his eyes were assessing, not invasive, just checking. "Yes," she said. "Thank you for the breakfast. Figured you'd be hungry." He hung the rope on a peg by the barn door. "I've got to ride the north fence line today, check for breaks before the first snow hits. You're welcome to come along, see the property, or you can stay here, rest up, your choice." There was that phrase again. Your choice. Ayla studied him, trying to reconcile this quiet man with every other white man she'd encountered. He wasn't performing kindness for an audience. He wasn't expecting gratitude or submission. He was just existing alongside her, as if she were a person rather than a problem to be solved. "I'll come," she decided. "I'm better at moving than sitting still." Something that might have been understanding crossed Ethan's face. "I know the feeling. I'll saddle the horses." 20 minutes later, they were riding up a narrow trail that wound through stands of lodgepole pine and aspen. Ethan had given her the gray mare. "Her name's Ash," he'd said, "and she's got more sense than most people I know." And he rode a sturdy bay gelding that matched his careful, economical movements. They rode in silence for the first hour. The only sounds, the creak of leather, the soft thud of hooves on packed earth, and the whisper of wind through the trees. Ayla felt herself settling into the rhythm of it, her body remembering what it was to ride freely rather than in chains. Ash was responsive but not nervous, willing to trust Ayla's hands on the reins after only a few minutes of adjustment. The mare picked her way over roots and rocks with the confidence of an animal who knew this land well. "How long have you had the ranch?" Ayla asked finally, the silence growing too heavy with unspoken questions. 5 years, Ethan answered, his eyes scanning the fence line that ran parallel to the trail. "Came out here after the war. I needed—" He paused, searching for words. Distance. From everything I'd seen, everything I'd done. This felt far enough away that maybe I could forget. "Did it work?" "No," he said simply. "But the work helped. Building something instead of destroying it, that helped." They crested a rise, and the land opened up before them. Rolling meadows that would be thick with grass in summer, now turning golden brown with autumn's advance. In the distance, a small herd of cattle grazed peacefully, dark shapes against the pale grass. "How many head do you run?" Ayla asked. 43, last count. It's not a big operation, but it's manageable for one person. Or it was. He glanced at her. "Truth is, I've been struggling this past year. The work's getting harder on this leg, and I'm not young enough anymore to pretend I can do everything myself." "So you bought help." Ethan reined his horse to a stop and turned to face her fully. "I bought your freedom from a man who would have sold you to someone worse. What you do with that freedom is up to you. If you want to help with the ranch, I'll pay you fairly. If you want to stay until you figure out where to go next, that's fine too. And if you want to leave right now, I'll give you enough supplies to make it to the nearest town and enough money to start fresh." Ayla's hands tightened on the reins. "Why?" The question came out harsher than she'd intended. "Why would you do any of that? What do you get out of it?" "Peace of mind," Ethan said quietly. "The knowledge that I did one thing right in a life full of things I got wrong." He nudged his horse forward before she could respond, leaving her to follow or not. Her choice. Always her choice. After a moment, Ayla urged Ash ahead, catching up to ride alongside him. They spent the next several hours working the fence line. Ethan showed her how to spot weak points in the posts, how to splice wire without cutting herself, how to read the land for signs of where animals might try to push through. He didn't lecture or condescend. He simply demonstrated, then handed her the tools and let her try. Ayla's hands remembered this kind of work, practical, purposeful, with immediate visible results. She'd helped build lodges with her family, had learned to work leather and wood and bone. The principles were the same, even if the materials differed. When she successfully spliced a broken section of wire on her third attempt, Ethan nodded with what might have been approval. "You're a quick study," he observed. "I had good teachers," Ayla said, then added more quietly, "once." They stopped at midday beside a stream that tumbled down from higher elevations, the water so cold it made Ayla's teeth ache when she cupped it in her hands to drink. Ethan unpacked the saddlebags and produced bread, cheese, and dried apples. They ate sitting on sun-warmed rocks, the horses grazing nearby. "Can I ask you something?" Ethan said after a while. Ayla tensed automatically but nodded. "That man at the market, Briggs. He said something about an accident, about a horse. You want to know if I killed someone? I want to know if you're running from the law." Ayla met his eyes directly. "The man who owned me before Briggs beat me every day for 2 weeks. He said it was to teach me obedience, that I needed to learn my place. On the 15th day, I waited until he'd drunk himself stupid, and I cut the girth on his saddle before he went riding. The horse didn't know what happened. She just spooked at a snake like any horse would. But with no saddle to hold him, he fell wrong and broke his neck. She waited for judgment, for fear, for Ethan to reach for his rifle. Instead, he just nodded slowly. Did he die quick? The question surprised her. Yes, I checked to make sure. Good, Ethan said, and meant it. A man who beats a woman, or anyone weaker than him, doesn't deserve a slow death. He deserves a quick one and an unmarked grave. Ayla stared at him. You're not afraid of me? Should I be? Most people would be. Most people are fools. Ethan wrapped the remaining food and tucked it back in the saddlebag. You did what you had to do to survive. I spent 3 years shooting men I'd never met because someone told me they were my enemy. I think you've got the better claim to self-defense. They rode on in a silence that felt less brittle, more companionable. As the afternoon wore on, Ayla found herself watching Ethan more carefully. He moved like someone who'd learned to accommodate pain without acknowledging it. His bad legs stiff when he dismounted to check a fence post. His breathing a little too controlled when he had to bend or kneel. But he never complained, never slowed down. Does it hurt? She asked finally. Your leg. Every day, Ethan admitted. But pain means I'm still alive, so I don't mind it much. There are herbs that help. Willow bark tea for the ache, arnica salve for the inflammation. He glanced at her with interest. You know medicine? My grandmother was a healer. She taught me which plants help and which harm. Ayla gestured toward the forest. Even here I can see things that would ease you. Devil's club for the joint pain, yarrow for inflammation. If you have whiskey, I can make a tincture that would let you sleep through the night without the leg waking you. Ethan was quiet for a moment. How do you know it wakes me? I heard you last night, pacing upstairs around midnight, then again near dawn. I'm not used to having anyone notice, he said, something vulnerable in his voice. If you're willing to make that tincture, I'd be grateful. I'll need to gather the plants, and a few supplies, glass jars, clean cloth for straining. Whatever you need, he paused. And Ayla, if you know healing, that's a skill worth 10 men, especially out here where the nearest doctor is 3 days' ride. They returned to the ranch as the sun began its descent, painting the valley in shades of amber and rose. Ayla helped Ethan unsaddle the horses, curry them down, check their hooves for stones. He didn't hover or correct her technique. He simply worked alongside her, their movements falling into an easy rhythm. I'll make dinner, Ethan said when they'd finished. Unless you want to rest. I'll help, Ayla said. I'm not good at resting. In the kitchen, they moved around each other with surprising ease. Ethan started a fire in the stove while Ayla peeled potatoes, sliced them thin the way her mother had taught her. He seasoned a venison roast with salt and herbs while she set water to boil. Neither spoke much, but the silence wasn't empty. It was full of the small sounds of shared work, of two people beginning to find their place in each other's orbit. "You cook like someone who's done it 1,000 times," Ayla observed, watching Ethan's practiced hands truss the roast. "My wife taught me," he said. "She said a man who couldn't feed himself was helpless as a child. She was right about most things." "What was her name?" "Sarah." The name came out soft, reverent. "Sarah Jane Winters before she married me. She was a teacher from Philadelphia, came west with her sister and brother-in-law. I met her at a church social in town, and she was the only person there who didn't look at my scarred face and see a monster." "How did she die?" Ethan's hand stilled on the roast. "Fever, started as a cold, turned to pneumonia. I rode for the doctor, but by the time we got back..." He shook his head. "She held on for 3 days, long enough to tell me she loved me, that I'd given her a good life. Then she was gone." "I'm sorry," Ayla said again, inadequate words for a grief that still lived in every corner of this house. "Me too." Ethan slid the roast into the oven. "But she wouldn't want me to stop living just because she had to. She was practical that way. 'Ethan Cole,' she'd say, 'you're too stubborn to quit, so you might as well make yourself useful.'" For the first time, Ayla saw him smile with real warmth, remembering. It transformed his face, made him look younger and less haunted. "She sounds like she was strong," Ayla said. "She was, like you." The comparison startled her. "You don't know me." "I know enough." Ethan pulled out 2 plates, set them on the table. "I know you survived things that would have broken most people. I know you're not afraid of work. And I know you're still here when you could have run a dozen times today." "Where would I go?" Ayla asked, more honest than she'd intended. "Anywhere you wanted." Ethan met her eyes. "That's the point." They ate dinner as the last light faded from the sky. The venison was tender, the potatoes crisp at the edges and soft in the middle. Ayla found herself eating slowly, savoring each bite, not because she was full, but because she could. Because no one was going to take the plate away or beat her for eating too much. "Tomorrow I need to cut firewood," Ethan said, breaking the comfortable silence. "With winter coming, we'll need at least 3 cords stacked before the first real snow. After that, I've got to reinforce the chicken coop. Something's been testing the wire at night, probably a fox." "I can help with both," Ayla offered. "I appreciate it. And if you want to gather those herbs you mentioned, mornings are usually best. I can show you the areas where they grow thickest." "I'd like that." After dinner, Ayla washed the dishes while Ethan tended the fire. When she finished, she found him sitting in a worn chair by the fireplace, a book open on his lap, but his eyes distant, looking at something that wasn't in the room. "I'm going to turn in," she said quietly. "Thank you for today, for showing me the land." Ethan looked up, seeming to return from wherever his thoughts had taken him. "You did good work today." "And Ayla?" He hesitated. "I meant what I said. About the tincture, about you being here. You're not a burden. It's nice not to be alone." The admission cost him something, she could tell. Men like Ethan weren't used to showing vulnerability. "It's nice not to be afraid," she replied, and saw understanding flash in his eyes. In her small room, Ayla changed into the nightshirt and climbed into bed. Through the thin walls, she could hear Ethan moving around upstairs, the creak of floorboards, the sound of boots being removed, the groan of bed ropes as he lay down. Then silence. She waited, listening. When the pacing didn't start immediately, she felt an odd sense of relief. Maybe tonight he'd sleep. Maybe they both would. The days that followed fell into a pattern that felt less like imprisonment and more like partnership. Ayla woke with the sun, found coffee waiting, and joined Ethan for breakfast before they tackled the day's work. They cut firewood together, Ayla's rhythm with the axe quick and sure, while Ethan split the larger logs and stacked them in neat cords against the side of the house. They reinforced the chicken coop, and Ayla showed Ethan how to weave willow branches into a tighter barrier that would keep out even the most determined fox. In the afternoons, Ayla gathered herbs. She ranged across the property, finding devil's club growing in the shaded ravines, arnica blooming yellow in the high meadows, willow trees drooping their branches over the river. She harvested carefully, the way her grandmother had taught her, always leaving enough for the plants to regenerate, always thanking them for their gift. Ethan watched her work with undisguised fascination. "You move through the forest like you're part of it," he observed one afternoon as she stripped willow bark with practiced efficiency. "I was, once," Ayla said, "before everything changed." "What was it like? Your life before?" Ayla paused, the question opening doors she'd kept locked for so long. "It was beautiful," she said finally. "We followed the buffalo, lived in lodges that we could pack up and move in a day. My father was a hunter. My mother made the finest beadwork in 3 territories. My grandmother knew every plant, every star, every story our people had carried for generations." "What happened?" "The treaties happened. The soldiers happened. The promises that were never kept." She resumed stripping bark, her movement sharp now, angry. "They said we'd have land, that we'd be protected. But then gold was found, or someone wanted to run railroad through our hunting grounds. And suddenly, the treaties didn't matter. We were scattered. Some went to reservations. Some died fighting. Some, like me." She didn't finish. "I'm sorry," Ethan said, and it wasn't the empty platitude most white people offered. It was genuine, weighted with the understanding of someone who'd seen his own world destroyed. "Your war wasn't so different," Ayla said, glancing at him. "Men in uniforms deciding who lives and who dies, who deserves land and who doesn't." "No," Ethan agreed. "It wasn't different at all." That evening, Ayla made the tincture. She crushed the dried herbs in a mortar, mixed them with whiskey in careful proportions, and strained the mixture through clean cloth into a glass jar. The liquid glowed amber in the lamplight, potent and earthy. 3 drops in water before bed," she instructed, handing Ethan the jar. "It'll taste bitter, but it'll help." That night, for the first time since she'd arrived, Ayla didn't hear Ethan pacing. The house stayed quiet until morning, and when he came down for breakfast, he moved easier, his eyes less shadowed with exhaustion. "It worked," he said simply. "Good," Ayla replied, and felt a small spark of pride. As the week wore on, Ayla found herself relaxing in increments so small she barely noticed them until she realized she'd stopped checking the exits every time she entered a room, stopped sleeping with one ear listening for footsteps. Ethan kept his word in every way. He never entered her room uninvited, never touched her without purpose or permission, never raised his voice or his hand. But more than that, he saw her, not as a possession or a project, but as a person with thoughts and skills and value. When she offered suggestions about the ranch, a better way to organize the tack room, a shift in the cattle's grazing pattern to preserve the meadow grass, he listened and often implemented her ideas without question. "You've got good instincts for this," he told her one afternoon as they moved the herd to fresh pasture. "Have you worked cattle before?" "Buffalo aren't so different," Ayla said. "The principles are the same. You let them think they're choosing where to go, but you guide them gentle-like to where they need to be." Ethan laughed, a sound she'd heard so rarely it startled her. That's better wisdom than most cattlemen learn in a lifetime. On the 8th day, everything changed. They were in the barn, mucking out stalls in the late morning, when they heard the sound of approaching horses. Ethan straightened immediately, his hand going to the rifle he always kept nearby when working outside. His face had gone hard, alert in a way that made Ayla's stomach clench. "Get in the house," he said quietly. "Lock the door." "Ethan." "Now, Ayla." The tone left no room for argument. Ayla ran for the house, but instead of locking herself inside, she grabbed the kitchen knife she'd seen Ethan use for butchering and positioned herself where she could see through the window. 3 riders emerged from the tree line. The one in front was unmistakable even at a distance. Vernon Briggs, his bulk distinctive in the saddle. The 2 men flanking him looked harder, meaner, with the casual violence of hired guns. Ayla's blood turned to ice. He'd come back. Of course he'd come back. Men like Briggs always did. She watched as Ethan walked out to meet them, his rifle held low but ready, his bad leg not slowing him down. The riders stopped 20 feet from the house, Briggs grinning like he'd already won. Ayla couldn't hear what was being said, but she could read the posture, the tension. Briggs gestured toward the house, toward her. Ethan shook his head, his stance widening, his rifle shifting slightly. One of the hired guns moved his hand toward his holster, and Ayla's grip on the knife tightened until her knuckles went white. Then Briggs laughed, a sound that carried clearly across the yard, and wheeled his horse around. The 3 riders turned and left the way they'd come, disappearing back into the trees. Ethan stood motionless for a long moment, watching the tree line. Then his shoulders dropped slightly, and he turned back toward the house. When he entered the kitchen and saw Ayla standing there with the knife, he didn't scold her for disobeying. "What did he want?" she asked, her voice steadier than she felt. "You," Ethan said flatly. "He said I tricked him, that he didn't know what he was selling, said he wants to renegotiate the deal." His jaw clenched. "I told him we had no deal to renegotiate. You're not property." "He'll come back." "I know. With more men next time." "Probably." Ayla set the knife on the table, her hands shaking now that the immediate threat had passed. "You should let me go, before this gets worse." "No," Ethan said, and the word was absolute. "He'll hurt you, maybe kill you." "Let him try." Ethan met her eyes, and she saw something fierce there, something she hadn't seen before. "I told you, you're not a prisoner, and that means you're under my protection. Briggs comes back, he'll find out what a Union sharpshooter can do when he's defending his own land." "Why?" Ayla asked, the question breaking out of her. "Why risk everything for someone you barely know?" Ethan was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion he rarely showed. "Because Sarah made me promise. Before she died, she made me swear that I wouldn't let this place turn me hard, wouldn't let losing her make me into someone who only cared about survival. She said, 'If you get a chance to do right by someone, you take it, Ethan Cole. You take it, and you don't let go.'" He moved to the window, looking out at the mountains. "I've let a lot of things go in my life. People who needed help that I was too afraid or too tired to give. But not this time. Not you." Ayla felt her eyes burn with tears she refused to shed. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything." Ethan turned back to her. "But we need to prepare. Briggs isn't going to give up, which means we need to be ready when he comes back." Over the next 3 days, the ranch transformed from a place of quiet healing into a fortress preparing for siege. Ethan moved with military precision, his years as a soldier returning in the set of his shoulders and the calculation in his eyes. He checked every rifle, counted every bullet, positioned ammunition in strategic locations throughout the house and barn. Ayla watched him work, recognizing the shift. This wasn't the gentle rancher who'd made her coffee and asked about her herbs. This was someone who'd survived battles and knew exactly how much blood could be spilled when men decided violence was the answer. "Show me how to shoot," she said on the second day, finding him cleaning his Winchester in the barn. Ethan looked up, surprise flickering across his face. "You don't know how?" "My people used bows. Rifles were—" She hesitated. "Complicated. The soldiers kept them from us, said we'd use them to rebel." "They were probably right," Ethan said, a grim smile touching his lips. "Come on, we'll start with the basics." He led her to a clearing behind the barn where he'd set up targets, old feed sacks stuffed with straw and propped against hay bales. The rifle he handed her was smaller than his Winchester, lighter in her hands. "This was Sarah's," he said quietly. A .22 repeater. Not as powerful as mine, but accurate and easier to control. She used it for hunting rabbits and grouse. Ayla took the weapon carefully, feeling the weight of more than just metal and wood. This had belonged to the woman Ethan loved, the woman whose absence still haunted every corner of the ranch. That he would trust Ayla with it meant something, though she wasn't quite sure what. "First rule," Ethan said, moving behind her to adjust her stance, his touch professional and brief. "Never point it at anything you don't intend to kill. Second rule, always assume it's loaded. Third rule," he positioned the stock against her shoulder. "Breathe. Shooting's more about patience than power." He spent the afternoon teaching her how to sight down the barrel, how to squeeze rather than pull the trigger, how to compensate for wind and distance. Ayla's first shots went wide, the recoil surprising her, the sharp crack of gunfire making her flinch. But she'd survived worse discomforts, and she'd learned long ago that survival meant mastering whatever tools you had access to. By the time the sun began to sink, she was hitting the targets more often than missing them. Not perfect, but competent. Ethan nodded with what looked like satisfaction. "You're a natural," he said, taking the rifle to clean it. Most people take weeks to get where you are in one afternoon. I'm motivated, Ayla replied, watching the tree line where Briggs had disappeared 3 days ago. And I don't want to be helpless when they come back. You were never helpless, Ethan said, his voice firm. Unarmed isn't the same as helpless. I've seen what you can do with just a kitchen knife and determination. That evening, they ate dinner in tense silence, both of them listening for sounds that didn't belong. Afterwards, Ethan spread a hand-drawn map of the property across the table, marking positions with careful precision. The house is defensible, he explained, pointing to the thick log walls. Windows are small, only 2 doors, but the barn's vulnerable, and if they torch it, we lose the horses and all our winter supplies. So we can't let them get to the barn, Ayla said, studying the map. We can't let them get close at all. Ethan drew lines showing sight lines and approach routes. Best case, we spot them coming from a distance and discourage them before they reach the buildings. Worst case, he didn't finish. Worst case, we fight, Ayla finished for him, and hope we're meaner than they are. Ethan met her eyes, something like pride in his expression. You sound like a soldier. I sound like someone who's tired of running. On the 4th day, a stranger arrived. Ayla was hanging laundry, sheets and shirts Ethan had given her from Sarah's trunk, altered to fit her smaller frame, when she heard a horse approaching from the east. She dropped the wet sheet immediately and ran for the house, calling Ethan's name. He emerged from the barn, rifle in hand, but lowered it slightly when he saw the rider. The man on horseback was old, 70 at least, with silver hair and a face creased by decades of sun and wind. He wore a sheriff's badge pinned to his vest, tarnished but unmistakable. "Ethan Cole," the old man called out, his voice carrying authority despite his age. "Been a while since I rode out this way." "Sheriff Dalton," Ethan replied, his tone carefully neutral. "What brings you to my land?" Dalton dismounted slowly, his movements stiff with age and old injuries. "Heard you had some trouble. Thought I'd check in, see if the rumors were true." "What rumors?" "That you bought yourself a crow woman at the frontier market. That Vernon Briggs is claiming you cheated him. That she's violent and dangerous." Dalton's eyes found Ayla, standing in the doorway with her hands clenched at her sides. "That the one?" "Her name is Ayla Redhawk," Ethan said firmly. "And she's not property. She works for me, same as any ranch hand would. What Briggs is claiming is a lie designed to get what he wants." Dalton studied them both for a long moment. "Mind if I come inside? These old bones don't like standing long as they used to." Ethan hesitated, then nodded. "Coffee's on." They settled around the kitchen table, Ayla pouring coffee with hands that trembled slightly despite her efforts to stay calm. She knew men like Dalton, lawmen who enforced rules that were never written to protect people who looked like her. Even good sheriffs, and she wasn't sure yet if Dalton was good, had to answer to white communities that didn't value native lives. "So," Dalton said, wrapping his weathered hands around the coffee cup, "tell me what really happened." Ethan laid out the facts with military brevity. The market, the purchase, Ayla's arrival at the ranch, Briggs's return with hired guns demanding she be returned. He didn't embellish or defend, just presented the truth and waited. Dalton listened without interrupting, his faded blue eyes moving between Ethan and Ayla. When Ethan finished, the sheriff took a long sip of coffee. "Briggs came to see me 2 days ago," he said finally. "Spun a different tale, said you'd agreed to a trial period, that if the woman didn't work out, you'd return her for a partial refund. Said she attacked you, that you were too proud to admit you'd made a mistake." "That's a lie," Ethan said flatly. "I figured as much." Dalton set down his cup. "I've known Vernon Briggs for 15 years, and the man's got more lies in him than a politician at election time. But here's the problem. He's got money, and money talks. He's already filed a complaint claiming theft of property." Ayla felt her stomach drop. "Property," she said, the word bitter on her tongue. "That's all I am to the law, isn't it? Property that can be stolen." Dalton turned to her, and she saw something in his eyes that surprised her. Regret. "Under territorial law, you're right. But under any law worth the paper it's printed on, you're a human being who deserves better than what you've gotten." "Then help us," Ethan said. "I'm trying," Dalton replied. "But you need to understand what you're up against. Briggs doesn't just want the woman back. He wants to make an example. He's telling everyone in 3 counties that if a man like you can just take what's his and get away with it, then the whole system breaks down. He's got other traders, other men who profit from that market, all watching to see what happens. So what are you saying? Ethan's voice had gone dangerously quiet. That I should hand her over to keep the peace? I'm saying that if you fight this, it won't just be Briggs you're fighting. It'll be every man who's got a vested interest in keeping things the way they are. Dalton leaned forward. And Ethan, I know you. I know what you did in the war, know you can handle yourself in a fight. But you're one man on a remote ranch. If Briggs brings enough guns, then I'll need more bullets, Ethan interrupted. Sheriff, with all due respect, I'm not handing her over. Not to Briggs, not to anyone. She stays here as long as she wants to stay. Dalton sighed, looking suddenly older. I figured you'd say that. So here's what I can do. I can delay. I can tell Briggs the complaint needs investigation, that I need to interview witnesses, that territorial law requires a hearing before any action can be taken. That'll buy you maybe 2 weeks, 3 if we're lucky. And after that, the law will likely side with Briggs. Not because it's right, but because that's how the law works out here. Dalton turned to Ayla. Miss Redhawk, do you want to be here? Answer me honest now. Ayla met his eyes without flinching. Yes. He treating you right? Not hurting you, not forcing you to anything? No. He's been, she searched for the right word, decent, more than decent. He's given me a choice, which is more than anyone else has done in 3 years. Dalton nodded slowly. Then here's my advice. You both need to understand that decent doesn't always win. Sometimes the bad men have the law on their side, and all the righteousness in the world won't stop a bullet. He stood, his chair scraping against the floor. But I'll buy you the time I can. What you do with it is up to you. After Dalton left, Ethan paced the kitchen like a caged wolf. Ayla watched him, seeing the calculation in his eyes, the way his hand kept drifting to where his rifle leaned against the wall. We could run, she said quietly. Take the horses, head into the mountains. They'd never find us. And leave everything I built? Ethan stopped pacing, his eyes blazing. Leave the land Sarah loved, the home we made together? No. I'm done running from things that scare me. This isn't fear, Ethan. This is sense. If Briggs comes with enough men, then he'll find out what it costs to take what isn't his. Ethan crossed to her, and for the first time since she'd arrived, he touched her intentionally, his hand on her shoulder, firm but gentle. Ayla, I mean what I said. You can leave right now, and I won't think less of you. I'll give you supplies, money, a horse. You could be 3 days gone before Briggs even knows to look. But if you stay, I stay, Ayla said, the decision crystallizing even as she spoke it. I'm tired of being something that gets passed around, bought and sold and traded. This is the first place I've felt like a person in years, and I won't let them take that away. Ethan's hand tightened on her shoulder. Then we make our stand here. The next week passed in strange duality. During the days, they worked the ranch as if nothing threatened, moving cattle, repairing fences, preparing for winter. But at night, they planned for war. Ethan taught Ayla to shoot from different positions, prone, kneeling, from behind cover. He showed her how to reload quickly, how to conserve ammunition, how to stay calm when your heart was racing and your hands wanted to shake. Shooting at targets is one thing, he said on the 6th day, after she'd hit 10 consecutive shots from 50 yards. Shooting at a man who's shooting back is different. Your body will try to betray you, hands sweating, vision narrowing, breath coming too fast. You have to train yourself to work through it. How did you learn? Ayla asked. Ethan was quiet for a long moment, his eyes distant. Trial and error. Mostly error. First battle I was in, I froze up so bad my sergeant had to slap me to get me moving. Nearly got killed for it. After that, I learned to make fear work for me instead of against me. Were you afraid often? Every single day, Ethan admitted. But being afraid isn't weakness. It's intelligence. Any man who says he's never scared in a fight is either a liar or a fool. They were closer now, standing near each other as they reloaded rifles in the fading light. Ayla could smell wood smoke and leather on Ethan's clothes, could see the silver threading through his dark hair at the temples. He'd become familiar in a way that should have frightened her, but didn't. Somewhere in the past 2 weeks, he'd transformed from a stranger who'd bought her freedom into something else entirely. A partner, an ally. maybe even a friend.
"Ethan," she said softly, "why did you really buy me that day?" He didn't answer immediately, his hands methodical as he cleaned his rifle.
You want the truth?
"Always." "I saw myself," he said finally, "standing on that platform, beaten down but not broken, surrounded by people who wanted to own you or destroy you. That was me after the war, after Sarah died. I was standing in ruins, and everyone around me was telling me to give up, that there was nothing left worth fighting for." He met her eyes. "But I kept fighting anyway. And when I saw you doing the same thing, I thought, maybe I could help. Maybe saving someone else was a way to save myself." Ayla felt something shift in her chest, a loosening of walls she'd built so carefully. "Did it work?" "Ask me again when this is over," Ethan said with a faint smile. "If we're both still alive, maybe it did." On the 8th day, a rider came from town, not Briggs, but a young man Ayla didn't recognize. He delivered a letter to Ethan and left quickly, his eyes nervous and darting. Ethan read the letter once, then again, his jaw clenching tighter with each word. "It's from a lawyer," he said, his voice controlled fury. "Representing Briggs. They're claiming I stole property worth $500 and demanding either return of the property or payment of damages, plus interest." "$500?" Ayla's voice rose. "He sold me for $75. "Doesn't matter what he sold you for.
He's claiming that's what you're worth to him now." Ethan crumpled the letter. "This is a legal threat. If I don't comply, they'll take it to a territorial judge." "We'll side with Briggs," Ayla said, her earlier hope crumbling. "Probably." Ethan tossed the wadded letter into the stove, watching it catch fire. "But that takes time. Hearings, testimonies, legal procedures. Briggs is impatient, and he's not the type to wait for the law when violence is faster." As if summoning them with his words, they heard the sound of multiple horses approaching. Not the careful approach of friends, but the aggressive thunder of men who expected resistance. "Get your rifle," Ethan said, already moving to the window. "And get upstairs. You'll have better sight lines from Sarah's sewing room." Ayla grabbed the .22 and ran for the stairs. From the second-floor window, she could see them clearly. 8 riders this time, Briggs in the lead with his hired guns flanking him. But there was someone new with them, a thin man in an expensive suit who looked wildly out of place on horseback. Ethan stepped out onto the porch, his Winchester held across his chest. Even from her elevated position, Ayla could see the tension in his shoulders, the way he'd positioned himself to have clear shots at multiple targets. "That's far enough," Ethan called out when the riders were 30 yards away. "State your business and move on." Briggs dismounted, his bulk making the movement awkward. "Now, Ethan, is that any way to greet visitors? We've come all this way to have a civilized conversation. 8 armed men isn't civilized. It's an invasion. Just taking precautions," Briggs said with false joviality. "Never know when a man might get dangerous ideas about property that doesn't belong to him." The thin man in the suit dismounted as well, brushing dust from his jacket with disdain. "Mr. Cole, my name is Silas Pemberton. I represent Mr. Briggs in legal matters concerning the disputed transaction." "There's no dispute," Ethan said flatly. "I bought, I paid, the transaction's complete." "Ah, but that's where you're wrong." Pemberton pulled a document from his jacket. "Mr. Briggs maintains that the sale was conditional, that there was a verbal agreement allowing for return of merchandise if said merchandise proved unsuitable." "There was no such agreement." "Your word against his," Pemberton said with a thin smile. "And Mr. Briggs has witnesses who heard the entire exchange." Ayla's finger tightened on her rifle. She could see Ethan's knuckles whitening on his Winchester. This was the trap. Fabricated witnesses, legal documents that might as well be forgery, a system designed to protect men like Briggs and destroy men like Ethan. "Even if there was such an agreement," Ethan said, his voice deadly calm, "Ayla's not merchandise. She's a human being with rights." "She's a savage," Briggs interrupted, his false friendliness evaporating. "Property of the United States government, technically, assigned to me for transport and sale. You interfered with legal commerce, Cole. Now you can make this right. Or what?" Ethan's rifle shifted slightly, a minute adjustment that Ayla recognized as preparation. Briggs smiled, and it was the ugliest expression Ayla had ever seen. "Or we take her, and we burn this place to the ground for your trouble. Your choice."
The hired guns shifted in their saddles, hands moving toward weapons. Ayla sighted down her rifle, her hand steady, despite her racing heart. She could hit the one on the far left, the man whose hand was already on his pistol grip. One shot, and this would explode into violence that might kill them all. But before anyone could move, a new voice cut through the tension. "That would be unwise, gentlemen." Sheriff Dalton rode into the clearing from the tree line, and he wasn't alone. Behind him came 6 men, townspeople, Ayla realized, local ranchers and business owners she vaguely recognized from her single trip through town with Ethan. They were armed, their faces grim, and they positioned themselves in a loose semicircle that effectively surrounded Briggs and his men. "Sheriff," Briggs said, his confidence faltering slightly, "this is private business. Not when you bring 8 armed men onto another man's property and threaten to burn it down," Dalton replied. "That stops being business and starts being terrorism. We have legal standing. You have a complaint," Dalton interrupted, "which will be heard by a territorial judge in due course. What you don't have is the right to take the law into your own hands." He turned to Pemberton. "And you, counselor, should know better than to participate in what amounts to armed extortion." Pemberton's thin face flushed. "I'm merely here to facilitate—" "You're here to provide legal cover for thuggery," Dalton said bluntly. "Now I suggest you all turn those horses around and head back to town. Otherwise I'll arrest every one of you for trespassing, threatening behavior, and attempted arson." Briggs's face had gone purple with rage. "You can't do this. I have rights." "So does Ethan Cole," Dalton said. "And so does Miss Redhawk, whether you like it or not. Now move along before I decide to make this a longer conversation than it needs to be." For a long, terrible moment, Ayla thought Briggs would call the bluff, would signal his hired guns to start shooting. The air itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the first shot that would turn the ranch into a battlefield. Then Pemberton touched Briggs's arm. "This isn't the time," he said quietly. "We'll pursue this through proper channels." Briggs jerked his arm away but climbed back onto his horse. "This isn't over, Cole," he snarled. "You'll get what's coming to you." "Looking forward to it," Ethan replied, his rifle never wavering. The 8 riders turned and left, but not quickly. It was a withdrawal, not a retreat, and everyone knew they'd be back. When the sound of hoofbeats finally faded, Dalton dismounted and approached the porch. "That bought you maybe a week," he said quietly. "2 at most." "I know," Ethan said. "And Sheriff? Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. When this goes to a judge, you're going to lose. The law's not on your side." Dalton glanced up at the window where Ayla stood. "Miss Redhawk, you still have time to leave. I can escort you to the territorial line, give you enough money to start somewhere else." Ayla appeared at the front door, her rifle still in hand. "No." "You understand what staying means? Blood, likely, maybe death." "I understand," Ayla said, moving to stand beside Ethan. "I also understand that running doesn't change anything. Somewhere else, there'll be another Briggs, another man who thinks he can own me. At least here, I'm choosing to fight." One of the townspeople, a grizzled rancher named Morrison, spat into the dust. "Girl's got more backbone than most men I know. Shame the law doesn't see it that way." "The law will catch up eventually," Dalton said, though he sounded tired. "Just wish it would hurry." After the townspeople left, promising to keep watch and warning Ethan if they heard anything, Ayla and Ethan stood together on the porch, watching the sun set behind the mountains. "We can't win this," Ayla said quietly. "Not through legal means," Ethan agreed. "Then what do we do?" Ethan was quiet for a long time, his eyes on the darkening peaks. "We prepare for the worst and hope for something better, and if it comes to a fight—" He looked at her, his scarred face resolute in the fading light. "We make damn sure we're the ones left standing." That night, Ayla couldn't sleep. She paced her small room, then finally gave up and went to the kitchen. She found Ethan there, sitting at the table with a bottle of whiskey and 2 glasses. "Couldn't sleep either?" he asked. "No." She sat across from him. "Ethan, why are you really doing this? And don't say it's about Sarah's promise or saving yourself. Why risk everything for me?" He poured whiskey into both glasses, pushed one toward her. "You know what the worst part of the war was? Not the battles, not the wounds. It was coming home and realizing that all the things we'd fought for, freedom, justice, equality, were just words. They didn't mean anything if people didn't choose to make them mean something." He took a drink, grimaced. I came back from that war ashamed of what I'd done, what I'd seen, what I'd failed to stop. And then Sarah died, and I thought maybe shame was all I deserved. That building this ranch and living quietly was the best I could hope for. What changed? You did, Ethan said simply. Watching you stand on that platform, refusing to break, it reminded me that some things are worth fighting for, not because you'll win, but because fighting is the only way to stay human. He met her eyes. So yes, I'm risking everything, but what I'm risking isn't worth much if I'm not willing to risk it for what's right. Ayla reached across the table, covered his scarred hand with hers. It was the first time she'd initiated touch, and she felt him go still. Thank you, she said, for seeing me as worth fighting for. Ethan turned his hand over, gently squeezed hers. Thank you for reminding me what's worth fighting for. They sat like that as the candle burned down, two people who'd been broken by the world finding something in each other that might not be love yet, but was the foundation love could build on: trust, respect, and the shared understanding that sometimes the only way forward was to stand your ground and refuse to yield. The morning after their shared vigil at the kitchen table, Ayla woke to find frost coating the windows in delicate patterns that looked like her grandmother's beadwork. Winter was announcing its approach, and with it came a settling certainty that whatever was going to happen with Briggs would happen soon. Men like him didn't have patience for long legal battles, especially when the first snow would make travel difficult. She dressed quickly and went downstairs to find Ethan already awake, standing at the stove with his back to her. Something in his posture was different, tighter, more controlled, like a spring wound to breaking. Coffee's ready, he said without turning around, and I made extra biscuits. You'll need your strength today. Why? Ayla poured herself coffee, the warmth welcome against the morning chill. What's happening today? We're going to town. Ethan finally turned to face her, and she saw determination etched in every line of his face. I'm filing a counterclaim with the territorial court, and I'm hiring you a lawyer. Ethan, we don't have money for— I have money, he interrupted. Sarah and I saved. We were planning to expand the herd, maybe build a bigger house. That money's been sitting in the bank doing nothing for 3 years. Might as well put it to use for something that matters. Ayla set down her coffee cup carefully. You'd spend your savings on me? I'd spend them on what's right. Ethan pulled biscuits from the oven, the smell of them filling the kitchen with homey warmth that felt almost cruel given what they were facing. There's a lawyer in town, Thomas Whitmore. He fought for the Union, lost his son at Antietam. He's got no love for men who trade in human beings, and he owes me a favor from when I helped him prove land rights on his office building. And you think he can win against Briggs's lawyer? I think he can make it harder for Briggs to win, Ethan said. And right now, that's the best we've got. They ate quickly, then hitched the wagon. The ride to town took 2 hours through increasingly cold morning air, their breath and the horse's breath making white clouds in the crystalline light. Ayla wore one of Sarah's heavy coats, altered to fit her, and still she shivered. Ethan noticed and wordlessly wrapped a blanket around her shoulders. Thank you, she said, pulling it close. You're not used to this kind of cold, Ethan observed. Your people moved south for winter, didn't they? We followed the buffalo to lower elevations, Ayla confirmed. No one stayed in the mountains once the deep snows came, only fools and white men. She glanced at him with the hint of a smile. Though I suppose there's overlap in that Venn diagram. Ethan actually laughed, a sound that had become more frequent in recent days. Fair point. Sarah used to say the same thing, wondering why anyone would choose to live somewhere that actively tried to kill you 6 months out of the year. Why did you choose it? Because it's beautiful, Ethan said simply. And because beauty doesn't care about your scars or your past. It just exists, indifferent and perfect. That felt like mercy after the war. They fell into comfortable silence as the wagon rolled toward town. Ayla watched the landscape change, the wild forest giving way to cleared farmland, then scattered buildings, finally the main street of the settlement that served as the territorial hub. It was larger than she'd expected, maybe 36 buildings, including a hotel, general store, saloon, and the timber frame structure that housed both the sheriff's office and the territorial court. People stopped and stared as they passed. Ayla felt the weight of those stares, the judgment and curiosity mixing with outright hostility on some faces. She kept her head high, refusing to show the fear that wanted to make her small and invisible. "Ignore them," Ethan said quietly. "Half of them are just bored and looking for entertainment. The other half don't matter. And Briggs's half? Those we watch." Ethan stopped the wagon in front of a narrow building with a painted sign that read, "Thomas Whitmore, Attorney at Law." They climbed down, and Ethan offered his arm. Ayla hesitated only a moment before taking it, the gesture both protective and a statement to anyone watching. She was with him, under his protection, and he wasn't hiding that fact. The office was small but well organized, shelves lined with law books and papers stacked in neat piles. A man in his 50s looked up from a desk, his wire-rimmed glasses catching the light. He had a scholar's build, thin and slightly stooped, but his eyes were sharp and assessing. "Ethan Cole," Whitmore said, standing and extending his hand. "I wondered when you darkened my door about this business." "You've heard then." "The whole territory's heard. Briggs has been telling anyone who'll listen that you stole his property and threatened him with violence." Whitmore's eyes moved to Ayla. "And you must be Miss Redhawk. Please, sit down, both of you." They settled into chairs across from his desk. Whitmore poured 3 glasses of water from a pitcher, his movements methodical and careful. "First things first," he said, addressing Ayla directly. "I need to hear your story. Not what Ethan says happened, not what Briggs claims, what you experienced. Can you do that?" Ayla glanced at Ethan, who nodded encouragement. Then she began to speak. She told Whitmore about being taken from her family after the soldiers came, about being passed from one owner to another, about the beatings and the fear, and the man whose horse had thrown him. She told him about the market, about standing on that platform knowing she might die there, about Ethan stepping forward with an offer that made no sense. Whitmore listened without interrupting, taking notes in a precise hand. When she finished, he sat back and removed his glasses, cleaning them slowly. "Miss Redhawk, I'm going to be honest with you," he said finally. "Under current territorial law, you have almost no legal standing. The treaties that were supposed to protect your people have been violated so thoroughly they might as well not exist. Technically, you could be classified as property of the federal government, held in trust and subject to sale or transfer." Ayla felt her stomach drop, but Whitmore held up a hand. "However," he continued, "there are precedents we can use. The 13th Amendment abolished slavery, including of Native peoples. There have been cases in other territories where Native individuals have successfully argued for personhood and legal rights. It's an uphill battle, but it's not impossible." "What would we need to prove?" Ethan asked. "That Ayla is a free individual capable of entering into contracts, that she chose to work for you of her own volition, and that Briggs's claim of ownership is not only morally bankrupt, but legally invalid." Whitmore put his glasses back on. "The challenge is that Briggs has documentation, bills of sale, transfer papers, all legally executed under territorial commerce law. We'd need to argue that such laws don't supersede federal constitutional protections." "Can you make that argument?" Ayla asked, her voice steadier than she felt. "I can try." Whitmore leaned forward, his eyes intense. "But you need to understand what this means. If we file this counterclaim, we're not just fighting Briggs. We're challenging the entire system that allows men like him to exist. That makes enemies, Miss Redhawk. Powerful enemies who don't like being told their business practices are illegal." "I've had enemies my whole life," Ayla said. "At least these ones I'll be fighting in a courtroom instead of running from in the dark." Whitmore smiled, and it transformed his scholarly face into something almost fierce. "Then we have an understanding. I'll file the paperwork today. Preliminary hearing will be in approximately 2 weeks, assuming the circuit judge arrives on schedule. In the meantime, I need you both to document everything. Every interaction with Briggs, every threat, every witness who can testify to Ayla's free status and willing employment." "What about the money?" Ethan asked. "Your fee?" "We'll discuss that after we win," Whitmore interrupted. "Right now I'm more interested in the principle than the payment. Men like Briggs have been operating with impunity for too long. It's time someone pushed back." They left the office feeling something that might have been hope, fragile but real. Ethan had to stop at the general store for supplies, and Ayla stayed close to him as they walked through town, aware of the watching eyes and whispered conversations that followed them. Inside the store, the proprietor, a heavy-set woman with suspicious eyes,
served them with barely concealed hostility, slapping items onto the counter with more force than necessary. Ethan ignored her attitude and paid in exact change, not giving her the satisfaction of a reaction. As they loaded supplies into the wagon, a young woman approached hesitantly. She was perhaps 20, with dark hair and a face marked by old bruises faded to yellow-green. "Miss Redhawk?" she said quietly, glancing around as if afraid of being seen. "Can I speak with you, just for a moment?" Ayla looked to Ethan, who nodded. "I'll finish loading," he said. "Take your time." The young woman led Ayla a short distance away, to the narrow space between the general store and the blacksmith shop. She was trembling, Ayla realized, her hands knotted together at her waist. "My name is Clara," she said. "Clara Henderson. I heard what you're doing, fighting Mr. Briggs in court." "Word travels fast," Ayla observed. "In a town this small, everything travels fast." Clara took a shaky breath. "I wanted to tell you, I think you're brave." "What you're doing, standing up to him." "You know Briggs?" Clara's face crumpled slightly. "He sold my sister 2 years ago. Margaret was 16 and she'd run away from a bad situation in St. Louis. Briggs found her, claimed she was his indentured servant, sold her to a mining camp in Colorado." Tears spilled down Clara's cheeks. "We never saw her again. By the time we got a letter from her, she was already dead. They said it was fever, but Margaret was strong. She didn't just die of fever." Ayla felt rage building in her chest, hot and righteous. "I'm sorry," she said, the words inadequate. "I can't testify," Clara said quickly. "My husband works for men who do business with Briggs. If I spoke out, we'd lose everything. But I wanted you to know you're not alone. There are others he's hurt, women he's traded and sold like they were cattle. If you beat him, if you make him answer for what he's done," her voice broke. "It won't bring Margaret back, but maybe it'll mean something." She pressed a folded piece of paper into Ayla's hand, then hurried away before Ayla could respond. Ayla unfolded it to find a list of names. 6 women with brief descriptions. Sold to brothel in Denver, 1873. Traded to wagon train, disappeared 1874. Last seen at mining camp, presumed dead. Margaret Henderson was at the bottom of the list, her entry simply reading, "Gone." Ayla folded the paper carefully and tucked it inside her coat. When she returned to the wagon, Ethan took one look at her face and asked, "What happened?" "I'll tell you on the ride home," she said, her voice tight. "Right now I need to leave this town before I do something that gets us both arrested." They rode in silence for the first mile. Then Ayla showed Ethan the list. He read it, his jaw clenching tighter with each name. "This is what Whitmore meant," he said finally. "About challenging the system. Briggs isn't just one bad man. He's the symptom of something rotten that runs through this whole territory." "Then we burn out the rot," Ayla said fiercely, "starting with him." "We will," Ethan promised, "one way or another." But as they crested the hill that led down into the valley where the ranch sat, they both froze. Smoke was rising from the direction of the house. Not the thin stream of chimney smoke, but thick black clouds that spoke of something burning out of control. Ethan snapped the reins, urging the horses into a gallop. The wagon careened down the rough road, bouncing over ruts and rocks. Ayla gripped the seat, her heart in her throat, Clara's list crumpling in her clenched fist. They rounded the final bend, and Ayla's worst fears were confirmed. The barn was on fire, flames licking up the wooden walls and consuming the roof in great hungry gulps. The animals were screaming, horses shrieking in terror, cattle bellowing, chickens scattering in panicked confusion. Ethan didn't even wait for the wagon to fully stop. He leaped down and ran for the barn, shouting, "Get the horses! I'll get the cattle!" Ayla jumped down and ran after him. The heat was tremendous, the smoke thick and choking. She could see the horses inside, trapped in their stalls, their eyes rolling white with terror. Without thinking, she grabbed a bucket, dunked it in the water trough, and threw it over her head and shoulders before plunging into the burning barn. The smoke was worse inside, so thick she could barely see. She felt her way to the first stall, threw open the gate, and slapped the terrified mare hard on the rump. The horse bolted past her toward daylight. She moved to the next stall, then the next, the heat searing her lungs with each breath. Through the smoke, she could see Ethan on the other side of the barn, driving cattle out through the far doors.
Part of the roof collapsed behind him with a crash that sent sparks flying like demonic fireflies. "Ethan!" she screamed, but he was already moving, already pushing the last of the cattle toward safety. Isla freed the final horse, Ash, the gray mare who trusted her, and together they ran from the inferno. Outside, she collapsed to her knees, coughing so hard she thought her lungs might tear. Ethan appeared through the smoke, his face blackened, his clothes smoking. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, his hands on her shoulders. "No," she managed between coughs. "You?" "I'm fine. The animals?" They looked around. The horses were milling in the corral, frightened but alive. The cattle had scattered into the meadow. The chickens were everywhere, but most seemed to have survived the chaos. The barn, though, was lost. They stood together and watched it burn, the structure Sarah and Ethan had built collapsing in on itself with groans and crashes that sounded almost human. "Briggs?" Ayla said, the name a curse. "Probably," Ethan agreed, though he'd make sure he had an alibi. As if summoned by the mention of his name, Sheriff Dalton arrived with 2 deputies, drawn by the smoke visible for miles. He took in the scene: the burning barn, Ayla and Ethan both smoke-stained and exhausted, the scattered animals. "Anyone hurt?" Dalton asked immediately. "Just our livelihood," Ethan said bitterly. "Everything we had stored for winter was in there. Feed for the animals, tools, supplies, all gone. You see who did this? We were in town filing papers with Whitmore. When we got back, it was already burning." Dalton's expression was grim. "Convenient timing. And I'd bet my badge Briggs has 10 witnesses placing him somewhere else entirely." He turned to his deputies. "Check the perimeter. See if there's any evidence, footprints, torch remnants, anything." But they all knew it was futile. Whoever had set the fire had done it professionally, quickly, and with the kind of planning that left no traces. As night fell and the barn finally burned itself out, leaving only charred timber and ash, Ethan and Ayla sat on the porch steps, exhausted and defeated. The animals had calmed, finding shelter where they could, but the loss of the barn was catastrophic. Without it, they had nowhere to store hay, no shelter for the horses during the coming winter storms, no protection for their tools and equipment. "We can rebuild," Ayla said finally, though even she could hear how hollow it sounded. "With what money?" Ethan asked, not unkindly. "What I had saved is going to Whitmore, and without the barn we can't maintain the herd through winter. We'll have to sell most of them at a loss, and even then—" He trailed off, the math too brutal to speak aloud. "This is because of me," Ayla said, guilt crushing her chest. "If I left—" "Don't," Ethan interrupted sharply. "Don't you dare finish that sentence. This is because of Briggs and men like him who think they can terrorize people into submission. You're not the problem, Ayla. You're the reason I'm still fighting." They sat in silence, watching the last embers glow in the darkness. Then Ayla felt something shift inside her, a decision crystallizing with the sudden clarity of a mountain stream. "I'm going to leave," she said quietly. Ethan turned to her, his eyes sharp. "What?" "Not because I want to, because it's the only way to stop this." She stood up, her mind racing ahead. "Think about it, Ethan. Briggs wants me back. That's what all of this is about. Not legal principles, not territory rights. Me. So I'll go to him. I'll tell him I'll return voluntarily if he drops all claims against you, if he pays for rebuilding the barn, if he leaves you alone." "Absolutely not," Ethan said, standing to face her. "Ayla, he'll never keep that bargain. The moment you're in his power—" "I know," she interrupted. "I'm not stupid, Ethan. I know what he is, what he'll do. But maybe I can buy you enough time to get out from under this. Sell the ranch, take what money you can, start over somewhere he can't reach." "You think I'd let you sacrifice yourself for a piece of land?" Ethan's voice was rough with emotion. "You think that's what Sarah would have wanted, for me to save myself by selling someone else to slavery?" "It's not slavery if I choose it," Ayla said, even though the words tasted like ash. "It's always slavery when the choice is between your freedom and someone else's survival," Ethan shot back. He crossed to her, took her shoulders gently but firmly. "Listen to me. We're in this together now. Whatever happens, we face it together. If we lose the ranch, we lose it. If we have to run, we run. But we do it together, or we don't do it at all." "You can't mean that," Ayla whispered, but she could see in his eyes that he did. "I've spent 3 years dying slowly in this valley," Ethan said. "The land is beautiful, the house is solid,
But without someone to share it with, it's just a prison with a better view. You reminded me what it feels like to be alive, to have something worth protecting beyond just property and routine. His hands tightened on her shoulders. So no, you're not leaving. You're not sacrificing yourself. We find another way or we go down fighting, but we do it together. Ayla felt tears burning in her eyes for the first time since the market platform. Why do you care so much? I'm nobody. You're not nobody, Ethan interrupted fiercely. You're the bravest person I've ever met. You're smart, you're strong, you're kind, even after the world's given you every reason not to be. He stopped, seeming to realize how close they were standing, how his hands were still on her shoulders. He released her and stepped back, his expression conflicted. I'm sorry, I shouldn't. Don't apologize, Ayla said quietly. Not for seeing me as human. That's the most valuable thing anyone's given me in years. They stood there in the darkness, the ruins of the barn smoking behind them, the uncertain future stretching ahead like a path through trackless snow. And despite everything, the fire, the threats, the impossible odds, Ayla felt something warm unfurling in her chest. Hope. Foolish, fragile, dangerous hope. So what do we do? She asked finally. Ethan looked toward the mountains, barely visible in the starlight. We prepare for the hearing. We document everything. The fire, Briggs's threats, Claire's list of names. We build a case so strong that even a biased judge would have trouble ignoring it, and we hope that truth counts for something in this territory. And if it doesn't, then we make sure we're too expensive to destroy, Ethan said grimly. Briggs wants a fight? We'll give him one he'll never forget. Over the next week, they worked with desperate intensity. Ethan built a temporary shelter for the horses using salvaged timber and canvas tarps. Ayla gathered and stored as much winter feed as she could scavenge from the fields, working until her hands bled and her back screamed in protest. Together they inventoried what they'd lost, documented the damage, and gathered statements from neighbors who'd seen the fire. Whitmore visited twice, his arms full of legal papers, and his expression growing more serious with each visit. The preliminary hearing had been scheduled, but the judge, a man named Harrison who had financial ties to several traders in the territory, was known for conservative rulings that favored established commerce over individual rights. I won't lie to you, Whitmore said on his second visit, sitting at their kitchen table with papers spread before him. This is going to be difficult. Harrison's record on native rights is abysmal, and Briggs's lawyer is already filing motions to dismiss based on lack of standing. What about the fire? Ayla asked. Doesn't that prove he's dangerous? It proves someone burned your barn, Whitmore corrected. Briggs has an alibi. He was in a saloon playing cards with the mayor and 3 other witnesses when the fire started. Whether we believe that alibi or not, it's legally sound. So we're going to lose, Ayla said flatly. Not necessarily, Whitmore replied. I found something interesting in territorial precedent. 3 years ago, a case in Wyoming Territory established that Native individuals could claim personhood if they could demonstrate integration into white society, property ownership, lawful employment, community standing. If we can prove that you've been living and working as a free citizen, contributing to the community, then Harrison would have grounds to rule in your favor. She's been here less than a month, Ethan pointed out. How do we prove integration in that time? We get creative, Whitmore said with a slight smile. Testimonies from neighbors, evidence of your employment contract, documentation of skills that benefit the community, Ayla's medical knowledge, for instance. If people will testify that she's provided healing services, that establishes her as a valued community member rather than property. Ayla thought of Clara, of the fear in her eyes when she'd pressed that list of names into Ayla's hand. What if people are afraid to testify, afraid of what Briggs will do to them? Then we find the ones who aren't afraid, Whitmore said, and we make their voices loud enough to drown out the silence of the rest. In the days that followed, Ayla and Ethan rode out to neighboring ranches seeking support. Some doors closed in their faces. Others opened just wide enough for whispered sympathies but no promises of help. But a few, a precious few, stood firm. Morrison, the grizzled rancher who'd ridden with Dalton, agreed to testify about Ayla's skill with horses and cattle. A widow named Pearl Hutchins, whose arthritis Ayla had treated with herbal compresses, swore she'd speak to Ayla's medical abilities. Even young Clara found her courage and sent word through Pearl that she'd testify about Briggs's history if the court would protect her identity. It wasn't much, but it was something. And as Ethan said each night as they reviewed their progress, something was better than nothing. The night before the hearing, Ayla couldn't sleep. She stood at her window, watching moonlight paint the valley silver, trying to imagine what tomorrow would bring. Behind her, she heard Ethan's familiar, uneven footsteps on the stairs, then his quiet knock on her door. "Can I come in?" he asked. "Yes." He entered carrying 2 cups of tea. "Thought you might need this. It's that chamomile blend you made." They sat together on her narrow bed, the only furniture in the small room besides the washstand. For a while they just drank in silence, the tea warm and soothing. "Whatever happens tomorrow," Ethan said finally, "I want you to know something. These past weeks, having you here, it's been the first time since Sarah died that this place felt like a home instead of a memorial. You brought life back to these walls, Ayla. Hope. Purpose. Things I thought I'd lost forever. You saved my life," Ayla said quietly. "On that platform, when you stepped forward, I'd given up, Ethan. I was ready to die or disappear into whatever hell Briggs had planned for me. But you gave me a reason to fight. You gave me my life back." Ethan reached out and took her hand, his calloused fingers warm against hers. "Then we saved each other," he said. "And whatever the judge decides tomorrow, that doesn't change. You're free, Ayla. In your heart, where it matters, you're free. No court can take that from you. And if they try?" Ethan's eyes met hers, steady and sure. "Then we leave. Tonight, if we have to. We take the horses, ride for the territorial line, and start over somewhere the law hasn't caught up to Briggs yet. I won't let them take you back. I won't." Ayla squeezed his hand, feeling the strength in his grip, the certainty in his words. "Together," she said. "Together," Ethan agreed. They sat like that until the tea grew cold and the moon began its descent toward the mountains. 2 people bound by something deeper than law or land. A shared determination to fight for the right to choose their own fate, no matter what the cost. And when morning came, painting the valley in shades of gold and rose, they rode toward town together, ready to face whatever judgment awaited them, knowing that some battles were worth fighting even when victory seemed impossible. Because some things, freedom, dignity, the right to choose who you belong to, were worth more than certainty. They were worth everything. The territorial courthouse was packed when they arrived, bodies pressed shoulder to shoulder in a room built for half the number now crowding its walls. Word had spread, as it always did in small territories where entertainment was scarce and drama was currency. Ayla felt the weight of every eye as she walked down the center aisle beside Ethan, her spine straight despite the fear coiling in her stomach like a rattlesnake preparing to strike. Briggs sat at the front with his lawyer Pemberton, both men wearing expressions of smug confidence. Briggs caught Ayla's eye and smiled, the kind of smile that promised violence wrapped in legal respectability. She held his gaze until he looked away first, a small victory that steadied her trembling hands. Judge Harrison entered through a side door, a portly man in his 60s with white whiskers and eyes that had seen too much compromise to retain much idealism. He settled into his chair with a heavy sigh, as if the weight of jurisprudence was a burden he bore unwillingly. "This court is now in session," he announced, his voice carrying surprising authority for someone who looked half asleep. "We're here to hear preliminary arguments in the matter of Vernon Briggs versus Ethan Cole, regarding disputed ownership of one female Native individual." He glanced at the papers before him. "Miss Ayla Redhawk, according to counsel." Ayla flinched at the clinical description. One female Native individual, as if she were livestock being disputed at auction. Pemberton rose first, his thin frame somehow making him seem more serpentine than dignified. "Your Honor, this is a straightforward case of theft. Mr. Briggs legally acquired Miss Redhawk through proper channels, sold her to Mr. Cole with clearly stated conditions, and Mr. Cole has violated those conditions while refusing to return the property or compensate my client for his loss." "What conditions?" Whitmore interjected, standing. "My client has documentation of a complete sale, paid in full, with no mention of any conditional terms." "Verbal agreements are binding under territorial commerce law," Pemberton countered smoothly. "Mr. Briggs has witnesses who heard him explain to Mr. Cole that the sale included a trial period during which the property could be returned if unsuitable. That's a lie, Ethan said loudly, earning a sharp look from Judge Harrison. Mr. Cole, you'll have your turn to speak, Harrison said. Mr. Pemberton, do you have these witnesses present? I do, Your Honor. Pemberton gestured, and 3 men stood from the crowd. Ayla recognized them as the card players who'd supposedly provided Briggs's alibi for the barn fire. They looked like exactly what they were. Hired testimony, men whose loyalty could be bought for the price of a few drinks and some coin. Harrison sighed again, deeper this time. Very well, we'll hear testimony, but first, I want to address something. He looked directly at Ayla for the first time. Miss Redhawk, do you understand what's happening here today? Yes, Your Honor, Ayla said, her voice steady. You're deciding whether I'm a person or property. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Harrison's eyebrows rose slightly. That's a blunt but accurate assessment. And what is your position on this matter? That I'm a human being with the right to choose where I live and who I work for, Ayla said. Mr. Cole gave me that choice. Mr. Briggs wants to take it away. She's been coached, Pemberton interrupted. Your Honor, this display of articulation is clearly— I can speak for myself, Ayla cut him off, her temper flaring. I'm Crow Nation. My grandmother taught me English alongside our native tongue. I'm not property that's been trained to perform tricks. I'm a person who's been treated like property, and I'm asking this court to recognize the difference. The murmuring grew louder. Judge Harrison banged his gavel once. Order. Miss Redhawk, I appreciate your candor, but you'll address your comments through counsel or when explicitly asked to testify. Whitmore stood quickly. Your Honor, if I may, the very fact that Miss Redhawk can articulate her position, that she clearly possesses agency and self-determination, speaks to the core issue here. We're not talking about property. We're talking about a person who's been illegally trafficked and who has found sanctuary with my client. Sanctuary that Mr. Cole purchased for $75, Pemberton shot back, which establishes a commercial transaction, not humanitarian rescue. Payment for her freedom from illegal bondage, Whitmore countered. The 13th Amendment does not apply to Native individuals held under proper territorial authority, Pemberton interrupted. Which brings us to the documentation Mr. Briggs has provided, showing his legal acquisition of Miss Redhawk from federal authorities after her tribe's displacement. He produced a sheaf of papers, and Ayla felt her blood turn cold. She'd known there would be paperwork. There was always paperwork when white men wanted to justify cruelty, but seeing it spread before the judge, official stamps and signatures lending legitimacy to her enslavement, made her feel sick. Whitmore examined the documents, his face darkening. Your Honor, these papers claim Miss Redhawk was abandoned property found after a military action against a hostile native settlement. But Miss Redhawk's people were not hostile. They were forced from their lands after treaty violations by the federal government. That's a political argument, not a legal one, Harrison said wearily. If the federal authorities classified her as available for territorial assignment, then the federal authorities were wrong, Whitmore said forcefully. And this court has the power to correct that wrong by recognizing Miss Redhawk's personhood and her right to self-determination. Harrison rubbed his temples as if fighting off a headache. Counselor, you're asking me to overturn federal policy based on moral objections. That's not within my purview. I'm asking you to apply constitutional law, Whitmore corrected. The 13th Amendment is clear. Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction. Miss Redhawk is within territorial jurisdiction. Therefore, she cannot be held as property. Unless she's classified as a ward of the state rather than property, Pemberton interjected, which gives the territorial government the right to assign her to responsible parties for her own welfare and integration into civilized society. Ayla wanted to scream at the word civilized, at the implication that her people were something less than human that needed to be trained and managed. But she bit down on the rage, knowing that any display of emotion would be used as evidence of her unsuitability for self-governance. Mr. Whitmore, Harrison said, do you have evidence to support your claims of Miss Redhawk's capability for independent living and employment? I do, Your Honor. Whitmore gestured to Morrison, who stood from his seat. I'd like to call Samuel Morrison to testify. Morrison took the witness stand, his weathered face impassive. Whitmore walked him through basic questions: name, occupation, relationship to Ethan, before getting to the substance. Mr. Morrison, have you observed Miss Redhawk's work on Mr. Cole's ranch? I have, Morrison said. Helped them round up cattle after the barn fire. That woman works harder than most men I know, and she's got a natural way with animals. Horses trust her, cattle respond to her. That kind of skill can't be taught. It's earned. And in your professional opinion as a rancher of 30 years, is Miss Redhawk capable of earning her own living through such work? More than capable, Morrison said firmly. She's an asset to any operation. Ethan's lucky to have her. Pemberton stood to cross-examine. Mr. Morrison, isn't it true that you're a friend of Mr. Cole's? That you have a vested interest in supporting his claim? I'm a neighbor, Morrison corrected, and I'm telling the truth as I see it. That woman's no property. She's a worker who deserves fair wages and fair treatment. Pearl Hutchins testified next, describing how Ayla had treated her arthritis with herbal remedies that had worked better than anything the town doctor had provided. Her hands, crippled with pain for years, had regained enough mobility for her to sew again. She has healing knowledge, Pearl said, her voice quavering with age but firm with conviction. Knowledge that benefits this whole community. We should be grateful she's here, not debating whether she has the right to be. Pemberton's cross-examination was brief but cutting. Mrs. Hutchins, did you pay Miss Redhawk for these treatments? I offered, Pearl said. She refused payment, said helping people who needed it was payment enough. So she provided services without compensation, Pemberton said. That sounds less like independent business practice and more like the behavior of someone without legal standing to enter contracts. It sounds like kindness, Pearl snapped, something you'd recognize if you possessed any. The gallery erupted in laughter, and even Harrison couldn't quite suppress a smile as he gavelled for order. But as the morning wore into afternoon, Ayla could feel the tide turning against them. Pemberton called his witnesses, the 3 card players who swore they'd heard Briggs explain the conditional terms to Ethan at the market. Another trader who testified that such conditional sales were common practice. Even a minister who spoke about the moral obligation to guide lesser peoples toward civilization through structured labor. Each testimony was a knife cutting away at the fragile hope Ayla had allowed herself to feel. She watched Ethan's face grow grimmer, saw Whitmore's careful notes becoming more frantic, and knew with sinking certainty that they were losing. Then Whitmore stood and said the words that changed everything. Your Honor, I have one more witness, someone who can speak directly to Mr. Briggs's character and his history of illegal trafficking. I'd like to call Clara Henderson to the stand. Briggs went rigid in his seat. Pemberton whispered something urgent in his ear, but Briggs shook his head, his face darkening with rage. Clara entered from a side door, Sheriff Dalton beside her for protection. She was pale, trembling, but her jaw was set with determination. She took the stand and was sworn in, her hand shaking on the Bible. Miss Henderson, Whitmore said gently, can you tell the court about your sister Margaret? Clara took a breath, then began to speak. She told the story of Margaret's arrival in town, young and desperate after fleeing an abusive situation. She told how Briggs had befriended her, promised her honest work, then claimed she was his indentured servant when she tried to leave. She told how he'd sold Margaret to a mining camp, how the letters had stopped coming after 3 months, how they'd eventually learned she'd died in circumstances that were never fully explained. And you believe Mr. Briggs was responsible for your sister's death? Whitmore asked. I know he was, Clara said, tears streaming down her face. Because Margaret wasn't the only one. There have been others. Girls who disappeared, women who were sold and never heard from again. Mr. Briggs runs a trafficking operation and everyone knows it, but nobody stops him because he has money and connections. Objection! Pemberton was on his feet, his face red. This is hearsay and speculation, irrelevant to the current case. It's directly relevant, Whitmore countered. It establishes a pattern of behavior showing that Mr. Briggs views human beings as merchandise to be traded for profit. That pattern speaks to his claim of ownership over Miss Redhawk. Harrison considered this, his expression troubled. I'll allow it. But Miss Henderson, I need you to be specific. Do you have evidence beyond your sister's case? Clara reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded paper, the same list she'd given Ayla, now properly notarized and signed. I have names, Your Honor.
6 women in the past 5 years who were sold by Mr. Briggs and subsequently disappeared or died. I have letters from families searching for them. I have testimony from others who were afraid to come forward until now. She handed the document to the bailiff, who passed it to Harrison.
The judge read it slowly, his expression growing darker with each line. "Mr. Briggs," Harrison said, his voice suddenly sharp with authority that had been absent earlier. "Stand up." Briggs stood, his bulk seeming less imposing now, more defensive. "Your Honor, these are lies propagated by people with grudges. Did you or did you not sell a young woman named Margaret Henderson to a mining camp in Colorado Territory in 1874? Harrison demanded.
That was a legitimate labor contract. Answer the question, yes or no. Briggs's jaw worked. Yes, but, and this woman, Lucinda Graves, mentioned in Miss Henderson's document, did you sell her to a brothel in Denver? She went willingly. Yes or no, Mr. Briggs? Yes, Briggs spat. Yes, I facilitated her employment. Employment, Harrison repeated, his voice dripping with contempt. Is that what we're calling human trafficking now? He set the paper down and looked at Pemberton. Counselor, does your client understand that if even half of what's documented here is true, he's not just facing civil liability but potential criminal charges? Pemberton had gone pale. Your Honor, I was not aware. That's not an answer to my question. Harrison turned back to Briggs. Mr. Briggs, it seems to me that your claim of legal ownership over Miss Redhawk is built on a foundation of similar transactions.
Transactions that, regardless of their technical legality under commerce law, violate every principle of human decency and constitutional protection. The law is on my side, Briggs growled. She's property under territorial statute. She's a human being. The words came not from Whitmore or Harrison, but from Ethan, who'd stood abruptly, his hands clenched at his sides. She's a person who's been beaten, sold, and treated like livestock by men who hide behind laws that were written to protect your profits, not her rights. And I'll be damned if I sit here and let you take her back to that hell. Mr. Cole? Sit down, Harrison said, but there was no real heat in the command. He looked tired, ancient, as if the weight of every bad decision the territorial system had ever made was pressing down on his shoulders. Your Honor, Whitmore said quickly, seizing the moment, the issue before you isn't whether the law as currently written supports Mr. Briggs's claim. It's whether this court has the courage to recognize that some laws are fundamentally unjust and must be challenged. Miss Redhawk stands before you not as property, but as a person asking for the most basic human right, the right to choose her own path. Everything else is legal artifice designed to obscure that simple truth. Harrison was quiet for a long moment, the courtroom holding its collective breath. Then he looked at Ayla. Miss Redhawk, approach the bench. Ayla stood on shaking legs and walked forward. Up close, she could see the lines etched deep in Harrison's face, the weariness in his eyes that spoke of too many compromises with conscience. Do you want to return to Mr. Briggs's custody? He asked quietly. No, Your Honor. Do you wish to continue working for Mr. Cole? Yes, Your Honor. Of my own free will. Harrison nodded slowly. That's all I needed to hear. He raised his voice to address the full courtroom. I'm going to make a ruling that won't be popular with everyone here, and frankly, it might get overturned on appeal. But I took an oath to uphold justice, not to perpetuate systems that treat human beings like commodities. He looked directly at Briggs. Mr. Briggs, your claim of ownership is denied. Furthermore, I'm ordering an investigation into the allegations Miss Henderson has presented. If evidence supports criminal charges of human trafficking, you will answer for them. You can't do this, Briggs roared. The law serves justice, not the other way around, Harrison interrupted. And there's no justice in what you've done. He turned to Ayla. Miss Redhawk, this court recognizes you as a free individual with full legal standing. You are not property. You are not a ward of the state. You are a person, and you have every right to choose where you live and how you earn your living. The courtroom erupted. Some people cheered, others shouted in protest. Briggs lunged forward, only to be restrained by Sheriff Dalton and his deputies. Pemberton was gathering his papers frantically, already planning the appeal that would challenge everything Harrison had just declared. But none of it mattered to Ayla in that moment. She turned to find Ethan standing behind her, his scarred face split by a smile of pure joy and relief. He didn't reach for her, didn't assume. He just stood there, waiting. Ayla crossed the space between them and, for the first time, initiated an embrace. She wrapped her arms around him, felt his arms come around her in return, strong and steady and safe. Around them, the courtroom chaos continued, but in that small circle of each other's arms, there was only peace.
"You're free," Ethan whispered against her hair. "You're really free." "We're free," Ayla corrected, because somehow in the past month, his fight had become hers, and hers had become his, until they were bound together by something stronger than law or circumstance. They walked out of the courthouse together into afternoon sunlight that seemed brighter than it had any right to be. People surrounded them, Morrison clapping Ethan on the back, Pearl hugging Ayla with surprising strength, Clara crying and thanking them both for having the courage she'd almost lacked. Even Whitmore allowed himself a smile, though he warned them that the fight wasn't over, that Briggs would appeal and that appeals could drag on for years. But that was tomorrow's problem. Today they'd won. Today justice, imperfect and fragile as it was, had sided with the right thing. As they drove the wagon back toward the ranch, the sun painting the mountains in shades of amber and rose, Ethan reached over and took Ayla's hand. She laced her fingers through his, the gesture both new and somehow inevitable. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we rebuild," Ethan said. "The barn, the herd, our lives, all of it. Together? If you want to stay," Ethan said, and she heard the vulnerability in his voice. "I know you're free now. You could go anywhere, do anything. If you want to find what's left of your people, if you want to head west or south or anywhere that isn't here, I want to stay," Ayla interrupted. "This is the first place I felt like I belonged since I lost my family. The first place where someone saw me as more than a problem to be solved or property to be managed." She squeezed his hand. "You gave me my life back, Ethan. I want to spend it building something with you." Ethan's grip tightened on her hand. "I can't promise it'll be easy. The ranch is struggling, winter's coming, and Briggs won't let this go without a fight." "I spent 3 years surviving impossible things," Ayla said. "Easy doesn't interest me. Building something that matters does." They reached the ranch as twilight settled over the valley, painting everything in shades of purple and gold. The burned shell of the barn stood as a reminder of what they'd faced, but also as evidence of what they'd survived. Together, they unhitched the horses, fed the animals, and made dinner side by side in the kitchen that had become their shared space. After they ate, Ethan retrieved something from upstairs, a small wooden box worn smooth with age and handling. He set it on the table between them, his expression unreadable. "Sarah made me promise something before she died," he said quietly. "She made me promise that if I ever found someone who made me want to live again, someone who reminded me what hope felt like, I wouldn't let fear or grief hold me back." He opened the box, revealing a simple gold ring. This was hers. She wanted whoever came after her to have it, as a way of saying that love doesn't end, it just changes form. Ayla stared at the ring, her heart pounding. "Ethan, I'm not asking for an answer now," he said quickly. "I know it's too soon, that we've barely had time to breathe between crises. But I want you to know that when you're ready, if you're ever ready, I'd be honored to build this life with you. Not as employer and worker, not as rescuer and rescued, but as partners, as equals." Ayla reached out and touched the ring gently. It was warm from Ethan's hands, simple and beautiful in its lack of pretension. "Your wife must have been an extraordinary woman." "She was," Ethan agreed. "And she would have liked you. She always said the strongest people were the ones who'd been broken and put themselves back together." "I'm not fully back together yet," Ayla admitted. "There are pieces missing, pieces I might never find again." "Then we'll be broken together," Ethan said with a faint smile. "And maybe we'll find that the cracks let the light in." Ayla looked at this scarred, steady man who'd walked into hell to pull her out, who'd risked everything without expecting anything in return. She thought about the valley outside, harsh and beautiful and demanding. She thought about the work ahead, rebuilding the barn, surviving winter, facing whatever retaliation Briggs would attempt. And she thought about how, for the first time since soldiers had destroyed her world, she wanted to be somewhere. Not just survive somewhere, but truly be present, building a future rather than running from the past. "Ask me again in spring," she said finally.
When we've made it through the worst of winter, when we've rebuilt what was burned, ask me then and I'll have an answer." Ethan nodded, closed the box, but left it on the table between them. A promise deferred but not dismissed. Spring it is. The weeks that followed were brutal. Winter came early and hard, dumping snow that turned the valley into a frozen wasteland beautiful in its severity. They worked from dawn to dusk, rebuilding the barn with salvaged timber and new wood purchased with the last of Ethan's savings. Morrison and other neighbors helped when they could, but mostly it was just the two of them, working side by side in the bitter cold. Ayla's hands blistered and bled from hammering nails and hauling timber. Ethan's bad leg ached constantly in the cold, but he never complained. They moved through the days with grim determination, knowing that survival depended on getting shelter for the animals before the deep snows came. Briggs attempted his revenge in small, vicious ways. Cattle went missing, presumably driven off or stolen. Someone poisoned the well, forcing them to melt snow for water until Ethan could dig a new one. Anonymous threats appeared nailed to fence posts, warning them that justice would come for those who defied natural order. But they endured. Ayla's healing knowledge proved invaluable when Ethan caught a fever from working in wet clothes. Her tinctures and herbal treatments brought him back from the edge of pneumonia, and afterward, he looked at her with something beyond gratitude, a deep, abiding trust that needed no words. Sheriff Dalton's investigation into Briggs moved slowly but steadily. More women came forward with stories of being sold, disappeared, or trafficked. The territorial governor, embarrassed by the attention the case had drawn, appointed a special prosecutor. By midwinter, Briggs had been formally charged with human trafficking and fraud. His empire of cruelty was crumbling, one testimony at a time. Clara visited once, bringing preserved foods and news. Her husband had found work with a different employer, one who didn't do business with Briggs. She looked lighter, as if speaking Margaret's name in public had released some of the grief she'd carried. "You changed things," she told Ayla as they sat together in the kitchen. "Not just for yourself, for all of us who were too afraid to speak. You showed us that standing up was possible." "I had help," Ayla said, glancing at Ethan, who was outside tending the horses. "I couldn't have done it alone." "None of us can," Clara agreed. "That's the point. We're stronger together than they can ever make us weak separately." As winter deepened, the ranch settled into rhythms that felt less like survival and more like living. Ayla and Ethan worked together with an ease born of shared hardship and growing affection. They talked in the evenings by the fire, sharing stories of their pasts, her childhood following the buffalo, his years in the war, the people they'd loved and lost. "Do you miss them?" Ethan asked one night as snow fell silent and thick outside. "Your family, your people?" "Every day," Ayla said honestly. "But missing them doesn't mean I can't build something new. They taught me that life moves like a river. It doesn't stop flowing just because you wish it would. You either flow with it or drown fighting the current." "Wise people, your grandmother." "She was," Ayla smiled, remembering. "She used to say that home isn't a place, it's a feeling. It's where you're seen for who you truly are, where your presence matters. I thought I'd never feel that again after I lost them." "And now?" Ethan's voice was quiet, almost hesitant. "Now I'm starting to understand what she meant." Ayla met his eyes. "Home isn't the valley or the ranch or even this house. It's sitting here with you, knowing I'm safe enough to remember the people I lost without it destroying me." Ethan reached out and took her hand, a gesture that had become natural between them. "I'm glad you're here, Ayla. Not just because you saved the ranch, or because you're the hardest worker I've ever met, because you remind me every day that life after loss is possible, that building something new doesn't dishonor what came before." They sat together as the fire burned low and the snow continued falling, two people learning to let their walls down, to trust that vulnerability wasn't weakness, but the foundation of something stronger than either could build alone. Spring came late but glorious. The snow melted in rushing streams, the meadows exploded with wildflowers, and the world turned green and gold under endless blue sky. The new barn stood strong, its timber still raw but solid. The cattle had survived winter, and several cows were heavy with calves that would replenish what they'd lost. On a morning when the air smelled of sage and possibility, Ethan found Ayla in the meadow behind the house. She'd been planting wildflower seeds,
Blue lupine, Indian paintbrush, purple aster, turning bare earth into something alive and deliberate. "You're making a garden," he observed, watching her work. "I'm making a promise," Ayla corrected, "that we're staying,
That this place matters enough to make beautiful." Ethan knelt beside her, his bad leg protesting but manageable. "Spring came," he said quietly. Ayla's hands stilled in the dirt. She'd known this was coming, had thought about little else as winter slowly released its grip. The wooden box had stayed on the kitchen table all through the cold months, a question waiting to be asked again. "It did," she agreed, not looking at him yet. "And you said to ask you again in spring, when we'd made it through winter, when we'd rebuilt." Ethan paused. "We made it, Ayla. Together. We rebuilt the barn, survived Briggs's revenge, made it through the coldest months I can remember. And it was hard, but it was also—" He searched for the word. "It was good. Having you here, working beside you, knowing I'd wake up every morning to someone who understood what it meant to fight for the right to exist. That was good." Ayla finally turned to face him, this scarred man who'd given her everything by asking for nothing. "Are you asking your question?" "I'm asking if you'll stay," Ethan said. "Not as a worker, not as someone who owes me for freeing you, but as my partner in all the ways that matter. As my wife, if you'll have me. If a broken-down rancher with a bad leg and too many ghosts is someone you'd choose to build a life with." Ayla felt tears burning in her eyes, but they were good tears, the kind that came from joy rather than pain. "You're not broken down," she said fiercely. "You're the strongest man I know, strong enough to be gentle, brave enough to be kind, stubborn enough to fight for what's right, even when the whole world says you're wrong." "Is that a yes?" Ethan asked, and she could hear the hope and fear mixing in his voice. "Yes," Ayla said. "Yes, I'll marry you. I'll stay here and build this life with you and plant flowers in ground we clear together. I'll fight beside you when fighting's needed and rest beside you when peace comes. I choose you, Ethan Cole, not because you saved me, but because you showed me what it means to save myself." Ethan pulled her into his arms, and they knelt together in the dirt with wildflower seeds scattered around them like promises taking root. He kissed her then, gentle and reverent, and Ayla kissed him back, tasting salt from tears she didn't know which of them had shed. When they finally pulled apart, both smiling despite the tears, Ethan pulled the wooden box from his coat pocket. He opened it, took out Sarah's ring, and slipped it onto Ayla's finger. It fit perfectly, warm gold against her work-roughened hand. "Sarah would have liked you," Ethan said again. "She would have said you were exactly stubborn enough to handle me." "I am exactly stubborn enough to handle you," Ayla agreed with a laugh. "And you're exactly stubborn enough to handle me. We're a matched pair of impossibly difficult people who somehow fit together." "The best things usually don't make sense until after you choose them," Ethan said, standing and pulling her up with him. "What do you want to do first? As my wife-to-be?" Ayla looked around the valley that had become home, at the mountains standing guard and the river cutting its silver path through green meadows. She thought about everything that had brought her here, the pain and loss, the fear and fighting, the slow, difficult rebuilding of a self she'd thought destroyed forever. "I want to finish planting these flowers," she said, "and then I want to make dinner in our kitchen and sit with you on our porch and watch the sun set over our land. I want to live the ordinary, beautiful life that nobody thought a woman like me deserved." "You deserve everything," Ethan said simply. "And I'll spend the rest of my life making sure you know it." They married a month later in a simple ceremony at the ranch, with Morrison and Pearl standing as witnesses and Sheriff Dalton officiating. Clara came, bringing wildflowers from her own garden. Even Whitmore attended, presenting them with a legal document establishing the ranch as jointly owned property, something almost unheard of in the territory, but not impossible if you knew which laws to invoke and which judges to petition. "You're making history," Whitmore told them. "The first Native woman in this territory to have her name on a property deed. That matters more than you know." By midsummer, Briggs's trial had concluded. The evidence was overwhelming. Years of trafficking documented by brave women who finally felt safe enough to speak. He was sentenced to 20 years in territorial prison, his assets seized and distributed among his victims' families. His empire of cruelty was broken, and though it wouldn't bring back Margaret or the others who died, it meant no one else would suffer the same fate. The ranch thrived.
The wildflowers Ayla had planted bloomed in riotous color, transforming the scarred earth into something beautiful and alive. Travelers passing through began to call the property Wildflower Ridge, and the name stuck. It felt right, a place where something broken had taken root and refused to be torn out again. On a warm evening, as summer began its slow fade toward autumn, Ayla and Ethan sat together on the porch they'd rebuilt with their own hands. The valley stretched before them, gold in the slanting light, and everything they'd fought for stood solid and real around them. "Do you ever wish things had been different?" Ethan asked, his arm around her shoulders. "That you'd never been taken? Never had to go through everything you survived?" Ayla considered the question carefully. "I wish my family hadn't been scattered. I wish my people hadn't been forced from our lands. I wish the world was gentler than it is." She paused. "But if I could go back and change my path, knowing it would mean never ending up here, never meeting you? No, I wouldn't change it. The pain made me who I am, and who I am is someone strong enough to build this life." "You're the strongest person I know," Ethan said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "We're strongest together," Ayla corrected. "Separately, we were both surviving. Together, we're living." As the sun finally dipped behind the mountains and the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Ayla thought about her grandmother's teachings about home, about how it wasn't a place but a feeling, a sense of belonging that came from being truly seen. She'd found that here, in this valley, with this scarred, steady man beside her. She'd found it in the work of their hands and the trust they'd built through shared hardship. She'd found it in the wildflowers that bloomed where nothing had grown before, in the barn they'd rebuilt from ashes, in the life they were creating together from the wreckage of what had been destroyed. She was home, not because the world had become gentler or because justice had suddenly become easy, but because she'd chosen to plant roots in soil that had been scorched by fire and fought for, and because those roots had found purchase in something deeper than dirt, in partnership, in mutual respect, in the hard-earned trust that comes from facing darkness together and choosing to build light. The ranch that had been Ethan's prison of grief became their shared sanctuary. The valley that had witnessed so much pain became witness to healing, and the woman who'd stood on an auction block, broken but unbowed, became a force of nature that changed not just her own fate, but the fate of countless others who'd been told they didn't matter. Ayla Redhawk had been bought for $75, but she was worth infinitely more than any price, and she'd proven it by refusing to be anything less than human, even when the law said otherwise. And now, sitting on a porch under endless Montana sky with the man she'd chosen and who'd chosen her, she was exactly what she'd always deserved to be, free, valued, and home at last. The stars came out one by one above Wildflower Ridge, naming themselves in constellations her grandmother had taught her. Ayla found the North Star, traced the familiar patterns, and smiled. As long as you can read the sky, you'll never be lost. She wasn't lost anymore. She was found, and she was exactly where she belonged,